Hello, everybody. I just want to highlight that we just found out that the YouTube live stream did not go live until a few seconds ago. So because of that, we will reset from the beginning so we can have everything that was discussed and happened be live streamed simultaneously while we're having it. So we apologize for this inconvenience and for the delay, but probably we'll just reset the meeting from the get-go, from the beginning. And the initial was recorded, so people can access that as well. So the meeting for the June 30th, 2020 has been called to order. And the first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everybody. Before we get started with our meeting, again, I want to apologize for everyone who was waiting on YouTube, and I want to welcome everybody for joining us at the Corvallis School Board meeting for July 30th, 2020. And the one thing I want to mention is that we always welcome community input and we encourage it. There are several opportunities to communicate with the board. At any time, you can email the school board. And by going to the Corvallis School District Meet the Board, you can access ways to communicate with the board and also ways to be able to see all the material that are shared during board meetings, including the agenda. Next opportunity to provide a verbal comments, public comments during a board meeting will be in our next business meeting, which is August 6th, next Thursday. And the information on the school district website on the Meet the Board page provide the details on how to provide input. So with that, we will get started with a presentation from Superintendent Ryan Nass and the team regarding the reopening plans and the progress on it. So handing it on to you, Ryan.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Gave me a chance to practice. And so now it will be streamlined. There will be fewer ums, I guarantee it. So Lindsey, would you mind going ahead and starting the presentation? All right, so we have been working really hard over the months of June and July in preparation for the start of school. We've had to be adaptable and change as we've received new guidance. And at the same time, we have really been trying to make decisions that focus primarily on student academics and safety, and also making sure that we are creating plans that account for changes that we may see as we move closer and closer to the school year. So what we wanted to do tonight was to have each of our rapid development teams share updates about their status and the work that's been taking place, because I think it's a good opportunity for the board to hear, as well as the community, to hear what's going on and to understand the complexities of this work. The other thing I'm really proud of is how integrated it is. We'll have one person presenting for each area, but the integration across these teams has been really important as we've thought about all the implications for starting the new school year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the slides. Our plan is to share the information with the board and then leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So Lindsey, go ahead and move to the next slide. And one more. All right, so we wanted to open with the hopeful words of our students. This is a group of students from Rebecca Schneider's 7th grade 3rd period language arts class who worked together to write this piece. What I like about it is that it continues to elevate student voice in our decision making, and it's a piece that has been used not just by our school district, but by Colt Gill at the Department of Education with the state board. So it's getting a lot of publicity. At the same time, I think it's well-deserved because it really speaks to where we're at. So I'm going to take a moment just to read it to you. We must ask ourselves, what do we want to get out of this? We have the choice to choose whether to go through this uncertain time with an open heart, receiving others with compassion and grace, or we can isolate ourselves in fear. Our world can be changed for better or for worse because people are suffering. The economy is uncertain and appears shattered. People are losing loved ones to a virus that is affecting the entire world. This is hard for every single one of us. But this isn't all bad. It's an opportunity for change in our schools, our family lives, and our planet. We have a chance to try something different, and we should take advantage of that. We must remember that we are all in this together. So again, I think it helps to ground us in recognizing where we're at, but also the optimism of our students and the optimism I feel now as we've continued to be developing our plan for the start of school. On the next slide, there's a second quote. Go ahead, Lindsey. And again, I think this is one that I've shared before, but I think it's an important one for us to remember. And I think the reason it's important for us to remember is because it's also accounts for giving grace in these difficult times. So you don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. And it's a reminder that while we are developing plans, the plans also have to be adaptable, and we have to be able to change them as we need to. And also that understanding that all the implications, the component about grace for one another as we work through unpredictable and unprecedented times. Okay, the next slide, Lindsey. I think this is important to share with the board, again, because it highlights the scope of work and how things have continued to evolve over time. So initially on May 22nd, we started with our rapid development teams with the understanding that this is a crisis. At the same time, there have been other crises in the past, and there are things that we know that we should be working to employ, and characteristics that we can and learning we can take from other situations that have happened in the past that help us to be better prepared and more resilient. And so those rapid development teams are the groups that are going to share tonight, talking about the work in each one of those areas. May 28th, we had a message to families with a survey asking about returning to school, asking about our models. On June 10th, we got our first guidance from ODE related to the beginning of this upcoming school year. Prior to that, it had all been about the end of last school year and distance learning. Again, June 18th, we sent out a message to families announcing the hybrid and Corvallis online options. Again, one of the important pieces there has been that hasn't been a place for registration necessarily, but it's been allowed us the opportunity to receive guidance and to understand from families where they were leaning as we think about staffing for the beginning of the next school year. An additional executive order from the governor. We've completed a return to work survey with staff asking about their ability to return to work and considerations there. Again, talking to families and encouraging them to let us know where they were leaning for either hybrid or distance learning, which is also the equivalent of online learning. The ODE released updates around health and safety, which was an important piece for us to recognize around the requirement of masks, which was a change in practice and a change in guidance for us to take into account. We've met with the health department to talk about our blueprints and what those blueprints needed to include, an opportunity for feedback and questions. Again, we'll have an opportunity for you to see those blueprints tonight. They're in the board agenda packet. And then to finalize those at your board meeting on the 6th. And then we'll share that out with families. And finally, we are continuing to wait for additional guidance from ODE, specifically in support of our students experiencing disability. And that's a piece that has some important implications for us and for our students. And we're waiting patiently to receive that guidance, and knowing that ODE continues to put out information at a pretty quick clip, but there's additional information that we need to make sure that we're supporting our students completely. And then September 9th is still our first day of school. So while we made some changes to how that's going to look this last week, it's still the first day of school for our kids. Lindsay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, those rapid development teams that I mentioned before, again, understanding that we are in a crisis and how to make sure that we are accounting for and covering all the decision-making areas that we have to account for. One of those teams is health and safety, racial equity, social, emotional, mental health, summer programming, ed delivery, budget and finance, workforce, and operations. And again, as you think about the structure of our district with about 900 employees and nearly 7,000 students in 13 buildings, these groups and these areas really account for the majority of the work that we do, and are designed in such a way that they can spend time focused on receiving feedback and then coming back together as an integrated team to make decisions and understand the implications of the decisions that are made by other groups or other teams. So with that, each one of our rapid development team coordinators is going to take a couple of minutes to share 2 or 3 key pieces about where they are currently, understanding that there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end, but also this, in some ways, this is a status report. And again, I just want to recognize this team because they have been working incredibly hard to be prepared for school and to think about all the implications of the decisions that they're making and how they relate to maintaining student safety, maintaining that care and connection for our students, maintaining high academic expectations, and also understanding aspects of cultural relevancy in our teaching, the implications for use of technology. All those pieces are really important in our planning. And these team members have been thinking about that nonstop since we started to plan for this school year. Go ahead, Lindsay. So we're going to start with health and safety. Melissa Harder is going to talk a little bit about that area, and Rinda Gregory has also been supporting that area of health and safety.
I also want to have Erica be a part of this as well. Our slide's going to be pretty short because really our operational blueprint is the outcome of our group's work. So I'll let Erica speak at this point.
Okay, so the first point is that we employed multiple perspectives when we looked at developing the operational blueprint. We looked out for parties that had expertise in student and community health and safety. Perspectives from our group included a cross-section of district departments, the district nurses, building staff, and we had a great knowledgeable group from Benton County Health Department, which was extremely helpful, and we're in constant communication with them. The next point is our current safety standards. So we this was a little bit, it was an easy task because we already have a baseline. We have procedures already in place that promote health and safety. We have, such as health education, disease management, and community health already in place. So developing our plan, we just kind of built on these internal systems and bolstered those. The third point that we have here on our slide is flexibility. And so as you can imagine, we met with a larger team in June to really get this work started. But we've been continuing to work on this. It's a daily task as we update our work to reflect changing guidance and questions that come up. So like I said, we're in constant communication with the Benton County Health Department so that when questions do arise, they can work with us to adjust accordingly. So it's definitely been a work in progress, and it's been very, we've had a lot of help from a lot of different departments. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Erica and Melissa. Lindsay, do you want to go to the next slide? Racial equity. So Marcianne will share.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Marcianne here. And I put there 3 points, but one of the things that I wanted to start off with is to share with you that Corvallis School District accelerated their racial equity work back in 2013. And as I think about what has transpired over the 7 years, I never would have thought that we'd be living through a pandemic and really needing to shift the way we provide public education. But one of the things that I think is very important is that those 7 years of this work have really prepared us for what we are embarking on in the fall of 2020 in terms of building our capacity around racial equity and really ensuring that all our building principals, administrators, and coordinators have the lens and focus for really keeping our students and our most historically marginalized students, families, and staff at the center of our work. So the first bullet point there is really around how we intentionally are really trying hard to keep our historically marginalized students and families at the center. We met as a racial equity development team. We met quite a few times, but we've also been working with the other developmental teams as well. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is that each team did have a focus and does continue to have a focus on racial equity. And that was really central to, and continues to be central to all of our meetings. Second point is around focusing on culturally responsive teaching. Prior to COVID-19, we accelerated our work around culturally responsive teaching. We did, when we were in the schools, we were doing care walkthroughs and care audits and really digging into what culturally responsive teaching is and what it looks like in the classroom. So that is our expectation going into this year. Even though we will be virtual, we hope to support our teachers and staff to create rigorous virtual classroom environments, build authentic relationships with students, have real world learning, and have relevancy in their classroom. So we will continue to support our staff in that way. Lastly, focusing authentic connections with our communities of color, our Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And one of the things that we talked about extensively in our rapid development team in terms of the racial group was the difference between conditional care and authentic connections. And we felt that throughout this whole process that authentic connections is really key to engaging families and students in a virtual setting. So we will continue to work with the other rapid development teams to support and provide guidance in these areas. We will continue to meet throughout the 2020-21 school year. So our work is not done, it never is done. And we will continue to have ongoing analysis and measurements of how our racial equity work is impacting and what it looks like in our system by providing different measures of ensuring that we are keeping an eye and evaluating and measuring this work. We have also created a document with multiple resources for our staff to provide some guidance as well as some additional materials that they could be using in the classrooms. So looking forward, we are excited to continue working with the other developmental groups and working collaboratively.
All right, Joe, would you like to walk us through the social, emotional, mental health piece?
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, now.
Great. Thank you. Apologies, technical difficulties. The social, emotional, mental health in this rapid development team also includes counseling and special education. So this rapid development team, which I've joined Sabrina Alexander to lead, cuts across the district in a pretty broad swath. Over the last 4 months, we've done a lot of listening to families, teachers, and other key stakeholders around the experience students have had through our initial distance learning foray. And we've learned a couple of key things. First off, families that experienced marginalization prior to a distance learning environment continued to experience this and had it heightened. The core issues that affected that marginalization were surrounding grading practices, specifically a grading model based on attendance or compliance, inconsistent practices between our buildings, and communications that were not in a family's first language of origin. In order to really build a system that's able to bring students back into the sphere of success and elevate the voices of marginalized communities, we found that we really need to address those issues in terms of specialization. While a lot of the other rapid development teams have core products that they've developed, at this point, we have a lot of guidance that we're going to have to apply coming up pretty soon to specialize the work. Most of the groups that we address in terms of social emotional health and special ed are about adapting the educational model to be accessible for all students. So our work is just beginning at this point. A thing that I would highlight within this is that our planning to address a consistent return to school, meaning Superintendent Noss's plan for us to hold for 6 weeks, is a good example of a trauma-informed practice that will help students. That consistent stability and knowledge of a plan reduces traumatic stress, as opposed to the inconsistent unknown, which increases traumatic stress. I also have a short report on childcare work that we've been up to. Lindsey, would you be willing to switch to the next slide? Thank you. In addition to a lot of that other work, hearing from families and developing guidance around special ed, we've also been reaching out to our community and local experts regarding childcare. It's a super large issue that comes up in many, many community meetings, often as a #1 concern for other stakeholders. After an exhaustive exploration of our resources and our capacity, we have determined that we do not have additional resources to provide staff or community-based childcare services at this time. It's also out of sync with the health protocol material that's come up recently and our decisions to have students at home online learning to start the year. Our focus really needs to be on educating and supporting the social and emotional needs of students, and childcare just is not within that. It is something that's likely needed in our community, but we've encouraged partners and stakeholders, both in governmental and non-governmental organizations, that they need to take that task up.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Rinda is going to share a little bit about the work that's been happening around summer programming.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, everybody. As you can see through this slide, that the majority of our focus for the summer programming was on care and connection. We have already reached out to over 200 families, and it is a group of staff members already employed by the Corvallis School District who applied to be the hub of staff who would be reaching out to these students and these families who were identified by each school, students and families who they thought would be in need of connection throughout the summer and moving into the fall. The role of the Public School Foundation is something that needs to be identified. They support our summer programs consistently. And this year, I have to speak to them in their flexibility of responding to the reallocation request for summer programs that were granted and giving some additional funds to keep this ongoing care and connection support over the summer. And then lastly, as far as the bullets go, is that Ryan mentioned this earlier, that the collaboration between all of our teams and even other work that is going on in the district. So you're very aware, I'm sure, of all of the support that's come out of the Welcome Center with Chris Hawkins' leadership and Sarah Devine and Annie Bittner. And we've been working closely with them through a referral process. So the care and connection with these families that have been identified can be everything from getting them some food to helping them potentially with some housing situations and just checking in. How are you doing? How is the family? And then if there's a need for a referral of any sort, then we have our staff connect those families with the appropriate people. And the Welcome Center staff has been a big part of that. The one thing that's not in this slide is that we did have a few academic programs stay, and those were at the high school level around credit recovery to keep our high school students on track for graduating as far as their credits go.
Thanks, Rhonda. Now we're going to turn it over to Amy and Nikki to talk about the educational delivery program process and where we are right now.
Hi, everyone. Nikki and I are excited to be here to share with you about our ed delivery team. When we put this first draft of information together, I think Ryan was like, no, a few bullets, and it was like 10 pages. So we could be here for a long time. So trying to prioritize what we wanted to share with you tonight was a little tricky, but we'll be here for questions afterwards. We wanted to make sure that you were aware of the goals that we were starting off with. And they're listed there in these bullets, and that we really stuck to those goals, and we did this through a series of meetings. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the structure of how we came to what we came to, and then Nikki's going to address, where we landed and a little bit of details about that. So we had meetings. We went back on the calendar and counted at least 15, and those are not the meetings that included just Nikki and I, but each of those meetings had anywhere between 10 and 125 participants. We worked with teachers, administrators, and classified staff. We had input from parents, students, and really just dug into what is it we need to do for the fall. About halfway through, as Marcianne mentioned earlier, we had the social emotional group and the racial equity group join, because we saw that the connection was really critical, because we're talking the same thing, and we didn't want to create 3 different paths. It's really one path for all of our students. I think the other important thing before I hand it off to Nikki in the next slide is that we started acknowledging that Nikki and I facilitating these teams as 2 white women, that it was critical that we started every meeting with a grounding activity to center ourselves on race and equity. And if this is the work that we're doing is starting to build a structure that's going to work for our most marginalized students, it was really important for us to start in a place where we were getting grounded and centered in race and equity to begin with. I think I'll let Nikki talk a little bit about the hybrid model and where we landed, and then I'll jump in, Nikki, if anything else comes to mind. And Lindsay, you can go to the next slide. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy, for kicking us off. So I just want to share a couple of quotes before I talk a little bit more about the hybrid model. So one of the goals that Amy mentioned was that our team wanted to reimagine education. And in thinking about the hybrid model, we kept also thinking about how awesome learning could be in this hybrid model. And a couple of things really, things that people said stuck with me. So a student said, I think we need to think about how to utilize online platforms to create active learning spaces and opportunities versus passive learning. And a student shared that, and a teacher followed it up by saying, I believe project-based learning is a long-term investment that will revolutionize teaching in Corvallis, both during the COVID-19 pandemic and after, when we can be back in the classroom. And so keeping those 2 things in mind, as well as using guidance from health and safety, the teachers came up with these guidelines for the hybrid model. So as you have read, we are looking at 2 days of in-person or synchronous learning. And the focus there really is care and connection, and then also project launching. So understanding that students at home will not be spending all of that time in front of a screen or doing worksheets. The teachers have talked about how to launch students into independent projects that are relevant to them and connected to the real world. And so in those 2 days, there's an opportunity to interact with peers, interact closely with the teacher, understand what learning should be looking like at home, and then get into a project. And so those 3 days of virtual project-based learning are described in that section below. And teachers have there are teachers throughout our district that have experience with project-based learning, and I think it will be a skill that our teachers will work on and continue to develop, starting small and getting bigger as we move through the school year. So as Amy shared, we've met 15 times and we will be continuing to meet with this group in August. And our kind of next focus is co-developing a plan for professional learning and remote learning implementation. So staff are prepared to meet our students where they are. So we are making some shifts in this hybrid model. Teachers are very good at building relationships face-to-face and are still learning how to create that care and connecting space in the online format, especially with students who are new to them. And then they also have some other learning to do related to project-based learning and the new learning management systems that they'll be using to share learning with students.
I think, Nikki, the only thing I would
All
add
right,
is
before we move to the next slide, which is about our Corvallis Online, I did want to make sure that Marcy-Ann had a chance to talk a little bit about DLI and that component of academics before we move on to the other model, which is our online Corvallis Online model.
Yes. So in terms of the dual language program, I'm working very closely with our building administrators at all our dual language schools, as well as collaborating with Byron and Mark in terms of what the possibilities are for our dual language students. At this point, one of the things that we are really keeping in mind is really the focus and the vision for dual language, which is really providing language modeling, language interaction, and cross-cultural connections. So in terms of students that are in the K-5 dual language program, we really want to encourage our students to continue with the hybrid model, because that is a place where they will have the student interaction, the teacher support, and where language can really happen in a very authentic way. We do realize that there are students that could only be fully online. So we are working very closely to create a FAQ that provides some additional information of what that could look like for students who can only be fully online. But in terms of the programming at the secondary, again, we will be working with the middle and high school administrators to really come up with working with them in terms of what the instruction will look like, but also to make sure that we have very clear communication to staff and students in terms of what DLI will look like in the 2020-2021 school year.
Thanks, Marcy-Ann, I appreciate that. We're going to shift now, Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind, to Corvallis Online. I just want to take a moment to thank Byron and Mark for taking on this additional responsibility for the school year as the coordinators of these two programs. And I wanted them to have a chance just to share briefly about the two models. One of the things that I've continued to advocate for or make sure that people understood is that Corvallis Online will be Corvallis school district teachers teaching with an online curriculum. And so it's maintaining that relationship between our students, families, and schools long-term. And so it's something that I'm proud of and something that I'm glad that we're able to offer this year. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Byron and Mark.
All right. So I'll kind of kick us off here real briefly. So good evening. Corvallis Online is the new program, and it's an option for families and students who need to be online, maybe for the entire school year, without the possibility of needing to pivot and switch back into a hybrid model or be in a building. It also fits that need for staff who need to still be working but cannot return to a building and be working during that time. The elementary pieces of Corvallis Online right now, a couple of the big things that are happening, there's two things going on. One is working on the technical piece to make sure all of the technology and the curriculum and pieces are set up kind of in the background, so that when families register or choose Corvallis Online, that we are set to go in our technology components and that they have access to all the curriculum and pieces. The other piece that's happening right now is rapid development of communication for families to fully understand what Corvallis Online looks like, what it feels like, what the student experience will be like in that, and to have clear communication and details about that. Elementary, we're partnering with and using Florida virtual curriculum And that is a comprehensive, fully online curriculum that is the part that can sometimes be misleading because it's called online. For the elementary age, it's really developmentally appropriate in that components are online, in addition to hands-on projects, paper pencil type work. It's not completely and solely online, and it can be self-paced, along with synchronous and asynchronous lessons, with individual feedback and from the teacher. We're beginning to work on the core courses and the types of the special classes or electives that the elementary students and families can choose from as part of that experience. And then working on kind of 3 parts of what it looks like online and hands-on, what it looks like to keep a community and build community throughout that platform, and then what it takes to help support families and students to build the schedules that work for them within that.
Good evening. I'm
Thanks,
really
Byron.
excited to be part of.
Mark will talk about our 6 through 12 program.
Thanks, Ryan. Really excited to be a part of Corvallis Online. With this pandemic, I think it's so important that we have an online platform that's both rigorous and comprehensive. At the secondary level, we're going to be using Apex Learning courseware. The thing I like about Apex, probably the key features for me is how relevant and applicable the lessons are. Every lesson starts with some sort of real life example where the concept that the student will be learning, they can apply to that. I also like how student-centered it is. It gives the student so much control over the pace of the lesson, the time and place where they interact with the material. And because this learning is so much more asynchronous, a little bit different than the Florida virtual school in K-5, one focus for me with our teachers is going to be really around care and connection, especially because there's not going to be that student-to-student piece that we might see in the hybrid. So I'm excited about it, and we're deciding on what courses are going to be offered right now and get that published and out to families soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark and Byron, for stepping up and helping out to develop this and get it ready for our families this school year. Next slide. Budget and finance, Olivia.
Hi. Okay, so just want to talk about a couple of things that have been going on in the budget and finance world, starting with the CARES Act emergency relief funds. So in total, the district, we expect to receive about $1 million in emergency relief funds made available by the federal CARES Act. These are coming to us in a couple of different segments, and we're going to be using these funds to implement our robust comprehensive distance learning applications, and that will include professional learning and collaboration time for our staff. We'll also be using these funds to support at-home learning by providing students with internet access and connectivity, supplying our schools with signage, tools to promote physical distancing, protective barriers, personal protective equipment, and sanitizing equipment and supplies, training our staff on their school's operational blueprint for reentry, and allowing for some additional staff time to develop our student cohorts, schedule students, develop new transportation routes, supervise students during transitions, and additional time for cleaning and sanitizing our school facilities. So these funds are much appreciated, and we have a lot of new expenses that we're experiencing. And so this will help alleviate some of our tightness in our budget. And so it's a great thing. Regarding the state revenue shortfall, on July 16th, so just a couple of weeks ago, the co-chairs of the legislature's Ways and Means Committee released their proposal to rebalance the state budget for the 2021 biennium. And this plan included some good news for K-12 public education. It proposes maintaining the state school fund at $9 billion, utilizing $400 million in education stability fund reserves, providing $150 million in student investment account funding, That's a significant reduction. It's a 68% reduction or $322 million reduction from what was initially proposed for the 2021 year. We're also expecting that the high school success grants will be maintained at full funding. And so really great news regarding the state school fund and the high school success grants. And we were optimistic to see that student account investment account funding was still included, although at a much lower level. So when it comes to rebalancing our budget and what does this all mean? If we assume that the co-chair's rebalancing plan comes to fruition, our current general fund revenue projections reflect about a $3.75 million budget shortfall. And so our first step was to look at our general fund reserves to align those with our lower operating revenues. And so after that, we needed to reduce our operating expenditures by about $3.1 million in order to achieve a balanced budget. And so earlier this month, our district departments implemented reductions totaling $1.6 million that reflect decreases in spending on professional services, repairs and maintenance, travel, supplies and materials, and dues and fees. The remaining $1.5 million in reductions will be achieved through the elimination of approximately 20 full-time vacant positions. And we're currently working through our staffing reallocations and reassignments to reflect these changes. So looking forward, there's going to be a handful of things we're going to be carefully monitoring as the year starts. The first is student enrollment. That's important because our state funding is tied to our student enrollment, and we made assumptions about what our enrollment will be. And so we'll be closely monitoring enrollment to see if it's coming in as expected, or lower than expected, or higher than expected. We'll also be keeping our eyes on property tax assessments, which will come out in mid-October. And then the results of collective bargaining. So we made a lot of assumptions in our budget around our salary and benefits for next year. So the results of collective bargaining may have an impact on that as well. So those are the things we're still going to be monitoring to determine if any additional budget reductions need to be made. And we're still planning to present a supplemental budget to the board for your consideration in December.
All right, thank you, Olivia. Now Jennifer goes next with HR, talking about our workforce rapid development team.
Hello, everyone. In regards to workforce, our group has been discussing the work survey that you heard Ryan mention that was sent out end of June. We had almost 700 of our employees complete that survey. We also have been talking about staffing, because not only are we staffing at our building levels, we're also needing to staff for Corvallis Online as well. And then the biggest one we've been tackling lately has been on working conditions. As we looked at coming back face-to-face and also online, the working conditions need to actually be handled, many of them through bargaining, which we have started in the last couple of weeks with both associations. And some of the key topics in that area is around workload, leave, safety, and training. And we're continuing to work through all of those pieces to ensure that our staff are supported during this reopening.
All right, next will be Kim Patton, talking about operations.
So my work is very technical. So we've been working on how we're going to keep buildings clean, which is a really critical part of the safety for staff and students. So we've created cleaning matrices to talk about in every building what part of the building is cleaned by whom, how often, and how, with protocols associated with all of that. We've also taken on the role of ordering all personal protective equipment for the entire district. So I'm going to give you just a quick rundown of the things that we've ordered. So masks alone, we've ordered 2 cloth masks for every staff member, so that's 2,000 cloth masks. We ordered 300,000 adult-size paper masks, 150,000 youth-size masks. We ordered 1,000 face shields. We have vinyl gloves, gowns for staff who are working with body fluids, We've got hand sanitizers by, oh gosh, I can't tell you how many gallons of hand sanitizer, disinfectant spray bottles, disinfectant, microfibers, laundry service to go with that. We have sanitation sprayers that spray a disinfectant similar to what the airlines use, where you can walk in and just spray down the playground equipment, thermometers, garbage barrels so that we can support eating in classrooms, directional signage. So we've got stickers for the floors. We've got signs for signage for hand washing and masks required, and how to direct kids to wait in lines. We've got backpacks for elementary kids because we want to keep them from bringing too many things to school. We've got bins for sanitizing writing utensils so that we can delineate clean utensils and to be clean, disinfected utensils. Supply boxes for all elementary students. Head coverings and booties for the isolation spaces. The list just keeps going on and on. This is taking up every storage space at the district office right now. So there's a lot to think about, and it seems like something new pops up all the time. We're considering screening stations, so how to create those locations at every planned entry. Health and safety stations. So throughout the school and in every classroom, you'll have a health and safety station that has disinfectant, microfibers, the hand sanitizer, masks, gloves, everything you need to really keep our students and staff safe. I hit on the signage a little bit. And then student transportation. So it's been a little bit tricky to think about student transportation because we need to keep physical distance on the bus. So we're looking at 21 students on a bus, up to 21 students on a bus, depending on the size of the bus. And we aren't able to create those routes until we have our student groupings created and their day meet schedule. So as soon as we have all of that ready, we'll be putting together transportation routes. And we are looking at needing our entire fleet to transport at every grade level. So that reduced amount of capacity on each bus is going to really change how we do transportation. And then I just want to put a shout out to our food services department because they've been serving meals this whole summer, and they're working on how they're going to provide meals for our students while we're doing distance learning, and when we come back to school, how they're going to do food in the classrooms and provide physical distancing. So they've been working hard on that as well.
All right, thank you so much, Kim. So then we're going to shift to one more slide, and that is the Kiwi message. We like that the play on words there around Kiwi, but really it is the sort of that shared message about what's happening. And it's really hard to narrow it down to 3 key points, as you've heard all the work that's been going on over the last couple of months in preparation for the school year. So for the board, just to be thinking about these 3 key points in your communication. So the first one is that we have 2 options. We have the hybrid model, which starts remotely. And that's going to be that way for 6 weeks. And we also have Corvallis Online. So there's 2 options for families. Safety standards. We're planning safety standards that account for all those pieces that we shared with you earlier. And that we are always going to make sure that that's a part of the decision making we have for returning to school. And then also the flexibility piece. We also know that we have to maintain that flexibility as guidelines continue to change. And so we have 2 options for families for the fall in terms of educational delivery. We're going to maintain safety as a key standard of how we determine what to do next and how. And then also understanding that there needs to be a flexibility and adaptability because conditions continue to change. And that's an important piece for us to be able to move and adjust based on those changes of condition. So with that, again, I wanted to recognize this team, asking everyone to hone in and narrow to 3 key points about that work that's happening is really challenging because as you can see, there's been an incredible amount of work that's been done and accomplished. And at the same time, there's an incredible amount of work left for us to do before the first day of school on September 9th. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you, staff. It's been amazing to see this work, this hard work throughout the summer and even the spring planning for this. So thank you for all of what you do. And I'm sure our board members have so many comments and thoughts. I want to remind our board members, if you have a question or a comment, let's do the virtual hands up. I can't see all of us on one screen. So you can do that through the participants and then raise hand and then lower hand after the end of the question. Do we have any questions from board members? And let's go first with Vice Chair Sarah Finger McDonald, and then Vince Adams, and then Jay Conroy. Sarah?
Thank you all for just amazing work and dedication to our students. I have a few questions. Somebody's about to walk into this room, sorry. I think they got the message. I'll just ask one, and then if I get another chance, I'll ask another. One question that I think a lot of parents who are doing this juggling balance of trying to work and have children at home are really concerned about is the time commitment that parents are going to have to put in facilitating the learning on the hybrid schedule and the online schedule. Because if there are a lot of people who don't have the flexibility to work outside of sort of normal hours. So do we have any idea of what that's going to look like for parents?
I'll attempt an answer, and then maybe Nikki or anyone else can chime in. I don't think we have
to mute. So I'm wondering if Amy and Nikki would talk a little bit about what they can foresee parent responsibility in the hybrid, and then Byron and Mark to share a little bit about Corvallis Online with that regard.
Perfect. All right, I'll start, and then maybe Byron can go for the other half of the elementary. We are hopeful that when we're able to get some projects out there, that they'll be as independent as possible. And I was a kindergarten teacher, so I also understand that, you know, some of this is seemingly impossible. We are working hard to have a small group of kiddos associated with a couple adults at a time, so there can be regular check-ins even when they're not synchronous or live. And we're just well aware of how hard it is when they're at home, and have that in our constantly in our mind as we're planning. I don't have any specific, like, no, you're only going to need to do 1 hour a day to help with this. I don't think we're at any point like that yet.
For the K-5 pieces for Corvallis Online, it is a widely used curriculum in lots of states and districts. And so the estimate for elementary students, it varies on the time. It can be anywhere from 18 to 25 hours for the full week. As part of our communications that we're planning on and working out for parents with that, we're putting together some sample schedules on how different lessons and things could fit in, not time bound, but how they could be pieced out throughout the week. At the same time, our elementary online staff will work through some training so that they can also help families develop schedules and pace out the lessons that way. The workload for students is anywhere from 10 to 18 assignments through the online modules throughout the week through Florida Virtual.
If I can just add one quick thing, Sarah, that I think will help, something to keeping the hybrid model throughout with the cohorts. So if your child is assigned the A cohort that's Monday, Tuesday, that's the days that the synchronous live teaching will occur. And so there won't be a shift of that at the elementary level. So we'll also have schedules like this is a potential schedule for your child for Monday, Tuesday, and here's one for Wednesday through Friday.
I think at the secondary level, Apex is really designed for more independent work. And I think we're dealing with older students here. There's also the flexibility that they could potentially work on that later in the evening when parents are around. And our teachers will certainly work with some of those students who we find have parents that need to be around a little bit more, so we can develop a schedule for them. So.
Okay, and then at the secondary level, so similar to elementary, we've talked about the synchronous days, the days that would have been in person being synchronous. And while there's Care and Connection, there's also Project Lunch that happens there. What I heard from parents is that when teachers set the stage for what the learning should look like at home, there was greater success. So talking to the kid about what they were going to do instead of just putting it onto the learning management system or platform. The other thing that we have been talking about is College Hill used a model in the spring where they had some staff that they called distance learning coaches. They were coaches for students. And so they were connected to students and regularly checking in with them on their goals and monitoring progress. And so I am planning to work with Eric Wright from College Hill, as well as Joe, because I know he's had a lot of success in summer outreach to think differently about the role of our educational assistants in some of that ongoing connection and coaching students through their learning.
Thank you. Saria, if it's okay, I'll move to the rest of the board and then we can do next question, unless there is any other clarification from staff or from Sarah. Awesome. So next up is Vince, Director Vince Adams.
Well, first I have to say that I'm just kind of overwhelmed at the amount of work that you all have done. It's just really, it's kind of staggering. And I think that you should be rightly proud to be presenting this to the board and to the community today or tonight. This is just really astonishing and amazing work. And I know that a lot of people are feeling anxious about what the fall looks like, but based on what I've been hearing, up to this, and then what this presentation tonight, I'm feeling really hopeful. I really am. I got to hear a little bit about this this morning, but I'd love to hear from the TNL team and also from the Corvallis Online team about professional development. Our staff, our teaching staff has been off. We've given them a break over the summer, but there is a steep learning curve that needs to happen in a fairly short amount of time. So I'd like to hear about the plan around professional development, getting our staff ready.
I can start by talking about secondary, and I think a lot of this is applicable for elementary as well. So I have pulled together the secondary part of the educational delivery team to ask them what their professional learning needs are. They learned some about Canvas in the spring, but right now Canvas, the learning management system, they're feeling like is their biggest need for learning. And so I have a team of of our Canvas experts in district kind of thinking about their own learning. So we're meeting next week. They're thinking about like, what were my stumbling blocks and where did I get stuck? And then what moved me ahead to try and create a plan for our teachers related to Canvas. And once I feel like they're comfortable in Canvas, then they'll be ready to take on more of the project-based learning for themselves. And so, but the direction for professional learning is really coming from the teachers. So that ed delivery team is saying, what do we need to know and how do we think we can learn it? And what should be our timelines? Like what should be our metrics and what should be our outcomes? So they're setting those for themselves because it will be different based on teachers' experiences. And I don't think professional learning will be one size fits all.
I think in addition, we're doing very similar things at elementary, and Nikki and I've talked about getting some synchronous and asynchronous. So some that you can just do on your at home, just at any time and have that ready to go. And then some here we're doing this as a team and as a group to make sure that we're all having the same understanding. And we'll be working through those in the next 2 weeks to hopefully have a pretty clear plan for the rest of August and all of September. Additionally, the schedules that we have built in professional time every week. So It's our intention that we know we can't get it all done right now, and we'll chunk it a little bit and have professional learning opportunities throughout the school year.
For the elementary staff for online, Amy and I have worked a lot together recently to make sure that our elementary staff is also receiving similar PD that's aligned to board goals because they're not a separate staff. They're still part of our Corvallis staff, and we want to have the same lens and working on the same things. At the same time, that role is a little bit different, doing a fully online program. And so part of that is a deeper dive directly with Florida Virtual for a few days to learn that curriculum and how to use that. I think I would expand that question a little bit more, or like that answer a little bit more. For the online piece, it's really a partnership with the family and the student. And so I see us as we start as really the professional piece is gone, right? We're all just learning together. And so with that, we're working on developing how do we do orientation for families and for students to do all of their Florida virtual work together online. And so I think a lot of the learning for our online staff will actually happen side by side with students and families as we learn to work through that system together. And so we'll provide training and orientation that way.
And at the secondary level, it's going to be very similar to the elementary. With the purchase of the Apex system, professional development comes along with that. And so there's going to be a few days of training on the system. And right now we're in the process of trying to decide who those staff are going to be, so then we can set that training up.
That's tremendous. Thank you. You know, as I was listening,
professional development.
What was that, Ryan?
Melissa, is there anything
yeah,
else
sorry.
that you would like to add around professional development?
I think Nikki hit the highlights. We're really focused on working together with our teachers so that we can create alignment, making sure our workload for our students is similar in the fall, because that was an area that we struggled with, I think, during the emergency distance learning that we did in the springtime. And we're also listening to our teachers who really do want some help with Canvas, and Nikki addressed that already, so thanks.
Yeah, I'm just so impressed about this particular aspect of the work that you guys are doing, the planning that you've done, you know, developing and creating systems, and then preparing yourselves to be delivering it out to the staff. And I'm just reminded of a quote from Rahm Emanuel. He says, "Never let a crisis go to waste." What I mean by that is it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. And I mean, this is just a key example of how the district team is really rethinking what education is going to look like, and is using this, you know, really adverse situation to be very, very innovative. And I'm just very, very impressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Thanks, staff, for the answers. Next up is Jay.
So Vince, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Vince, I appreciate your positiveness, but I have to tell you, my stomach is rolling right now. And I'm really torn, because I love schools and I love the work that this group has done. I mean, this, for purposes of the public, I'm here to cheerlead, to say this is a wonderful group of people who have worked really hard. But my analogy would be, this is asking a school district to put together an airplane in flight, and we don't even know the right design and whether it's going to work. And I'm saying that because I don't think we should tell the public it's going to be great. I can go back to my school days when I said education is a shared responsibility between mom and dad and student and teacher. And this is really going to stress that, because we've really relied on teachers big time in our recent 10, 15 years of education. And this is not going to work really well, because our teachers are not going to get to be tight with them. So my stomach is rolling, because I love to cheerlead about 509J and what we can do, but let's not kid ourselves. This is a giant struggle. So I have two questions with that downer, and I'm sorry. So Ryan, could you tell us and the public two questions? One, how did some districts get to do K3 every day, all day? And what did we think about that? And then what went into our thinking about 6 weeks? is there any chance that that can be pushed up with meeting governor's metrics?
All right, so I'm going to start with the first and move to the second, or start with the second and move to the first. So the 6-week decision was really based on a couple things. One is that we wanted to provide as much predictability for families as we could. Up to that point, we didn't have metrics for reopening or guidance in that regard, and it's still a local decision to be made. And so I wanted to get out to families as soon as we knew, to be able to say, this is how we feel like we need to start the school year. I think that in communicating that, it also allowed us to start to focus on what does it mean to teach in a distance learning or remote learning successfully. Yeah, you're right, it's a huge undertaking. And if we're trying to do that while we're still trying to figure out how to get 21 kids on a bus and the PPE in place and all of those safety measures, it became a situation where we needed to make a decision that was going to work and we were going to be successful in. So do something well and focus on it. The other thing I'd say about that is that if you think about the beginning of the school year, a number of districts now have said sort of similar things, but most of them have said 9 weeks. I thought about that because you think that's half a semester, but the problem in my mind in that decision is that is the beginning of November 11th, November 12th. It's right around Veterans Day. And if you do that, you should be anticipating a flu season along with the pandemic. And to me, it felt like if I made a decision for 9 weeks, I was really making a decision for February. And so I didn't feel like that was a decision that left a lot of room for possibility. And so that's really why I thought about the 6 weeks. In terms of the metrics, there are state metrics that have to be met in order for K-12 to come back. There's separate metrics for K-3, which is an exception. And we are in a situation where we would be able to, in that exception, look at K-3. At the same time, there's the piece about predictability, about all those aspects about safety, which was a huge decision component in my decision making, about safety of staff, about safety of students, about safety of the community. That was concerning enough to me that I thought that it made sense to say we need to go with 6 weeks. Now everybody knows it. We can plan around it. And as we get closer to the end of that 6 weeks, we'll continue to look at the governor's or OHA metrics and make a decision moving forward. But as of now, I felt like that was the most important decision to make based on the information I had at the time. And at the same time, in an early enough stage to let families know. Again, it's that scenario of back and forth. If we look at the metrics for 3 weeks and we're able to come back and the week later, the data doesn't look as good, then we'd have to close down again. And then we would look at another week out. Would we reopen? I don't think that is good for families either. And I know none of this is good for all of this is a challenge, but to go ahead and make a decision and say, this is what we're going to do. And this is why is really where I've landed on that. So thank you for the question. And thank you for the honesty in sharing how your stomach is feeling. Because my stomach has felt like that a lot over the last couple of months, usually in the middle of the night when I wake up. But I honestly feel like we have it's been a Herculean effort, and I'm really proud of the work that's been happening.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next up is Director Chloe White.
I'm sorry, there was feedback. I was like, whoo. Thank you. I did first want to say thank you to Ryan and all the staff. You all put like such an incredible plan together, and you can tell there's a great deal of care that went into the plan too. Those care and connection component over the summer, I think has been really amazing because I think that's just showing an extra step by the district that you're wanting to make sure that families are doing okay, even though school's not in session. And that's just like an extra step you don't usually see in the summer. And so I think that's been really nice for families. And there's so much to consider for you all and so much that's out of your control. And I appreciate that there's this wanting to help lessen the anxiety that families are facing right now of not knowing whether or not school is for sure or not, waiting to hear. And so just putting it out there, I think, is a really smart move for a lot of reasons that you've already stated, Ryan. And to prep for what's to come, a lot of other districts aren't doing this and may make similar announcements later down the road, or the state may make similar announcements. And at least we know the families in Corvallis School District have some advance notice and can start prepping for this. I just wanted to also say, like, I'm really excited that you all decided to use Canvas across the board for, like, I have several children in my home that all were using different things in the spring. And I know we were doing what we could, but it was really hard to keep up with the different modalities. And so it's exciting for me to think of other parents that may have been struggling with that too, to have one thing to learn. And luckily I know how to use Canvas and it's super user friendly, and the module components are really great too. My one question, besides all the, I think you all did a great job, because I do, is about what kind of considerations are going to be in place for students that can't keep up with the online, even though it's going to be, even if they choose hybrid, they're still going to be online for the first 6 weeks. And so that may be a struggle to not have the kind of support they were hoping for. And even students who, for various reasons, whether it's health of family or other reasons, aren't going to do the hybrid and are doing Corvallis online. Is there anything you all are anticipating on how to support those students who may fall behind quickly with online learning?
I know.
Just real quick. I know you said you were going to have, I know you said you're going to have like support people, and I agree, like how they do College Hill was awesome, like to check in on students, because I have College Hill kids, and so that was nice for them to check in. But the check-ins didn't mean they actually ended up doing some of the stuff that they were hoping they would. And so I'm just thinking ahead, like some of these kids are going to probably get behind, and that was one of my concerns to begin with in the spring when the pandemic started, was like the longer term impacts. So I don't know, like, if there's anything we can even do about that, but just thinking about any flexibility with students with their lesson plans, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
I think one thing I would share that I heard from a teacher this week who's doing summer school is we didn't do a lot of synchronous learning in the spring, because we knew that families were experiencing so much change, and like that a set schedule could have been hard. So a teacher that's teaching summer school, she said that she's meeting with students much more frequently synchronously, and that they're making a lot more progress, and that she feels like it does have to do with that connection that she's better able to make. So I think that that's one, kind of general strategy that we'll be employing that will be different than the spring. And she just felt like it's been much more successful. The other thing that she feels is more successful is higher expectations. And I know Ryan has spoke a lot about robust learning online. And so that is something that we continue to talk about, is that the learning is robust and it matters. And that it's relevant and real world and engaging. And so I know that those are some of the universal approaches. I know that we'll also be working closely with the Tier 4 team. Is Joe still here? I'm not sure. I can't see if he's still here. To continue to provide ongoing outreach and support to like some of those families that we were working with over the summer. I think that last year and the summer helped us to better know some of the students who may need ongoing support and more intensive support to make progress.
Nikki, I am still here. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, good. Sorry, just monitoring technical stuff. Yeah, Sabrina and I have talked a great deal about how do we address students that are falling outside the sphere of success. And so Lou, you mentioned, students who are not sort of achieving. I think that really addressing our grading protocols is going to be one part of that, but there's several other pieces that we need to address within that. Standardizing practices across buildings so that students have consistent expectations, as well as ensuring that our communication protocols go out in family first language. This was feedback we got consistently from staff, families, and community members. And the language protocol information was the most consistent piece of feedback we received. So we're hoping that the adaptations we can make from the learning we did in the first 3 months of distance learning will help us in online and hybrid models. We're going to have to do a lot of adaptation to make sure that students don't fall further behind.
Cool, thanks y'all. That's really great to hear, because like in higher ed, I know that the adding extra work for remote was not the best idea for that some folk were practicing, and the recommendation was not to do that. And it sounds like you all have some flexibility with what you're building, and I'm excited for the students that they'll have the extra support. So thank you.
Thank you, Lou. And next up, before I go with the next two questions, I want to say we're reaching 5 minutes warning for this agenda item. So let's make sure we keep the answers as concise as possible, if that's possible. But I'm really enjoying these answers and this really good discussion. Next up is Director Tina Baker. Tina, the floor is yours.
First, I just want to say thank you to everybody for all your hard work. I know this isn't easy for anybody, and it's an insurmountable amount of work. My question is similar to Boy White Bears. I was just wondering what kind of supports do we have in place for our parents and students who have, for the parents who have students who really struggle engaging whatsoever online, since we're going to be pretty much online for the first 6 weeks. How do we help these parents get these K-5 kiddos engaged and stay engaged whatsoever online?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I mean, I can just speak to one part that I didn't speak to earlier. I think one of the benefits of the hybrid model is the connection that students can make with peers. I know that in this time, like so many people have been isolated, including our students. And I know the students that we've heard from were very excited to get back to some kind of socialization. And so that is one aspect, I think, the social piece that could be bring more students to this format. I also think some of the learning that our teachers have talked about in the ed delivery team related to projects could also be more engaging than just screen time. Our teachers are talking about students doing more than worksheets or everything on the screen, but actually creating being innovative and developing things that are of interest to them versus being as teacher driven as they sometimes are in in-person classes. Amy, I can let you add if you'd like to.
I think we're close to time, so I don't have much to add.
All right, thank you very much. Next up is Therese.
Thank you, Sammy. Well, I have lots of questions, but I'm going to choose this one with the limited time that we have. So I'm thinking through a scenario where we get to the 6-week mark and our kids go back to school in person on the hybrid schedule. And then 2 weeks later, we have to end the in-person experience. And so I'm just wondering what effort, thinking, planning you have put into anticipating how we're going to care for families and for our children in the event that that moment arrives. And I realized before I asked my question that I did not say, I don't envy you the task of having to spend time thinking about this. And there's been a lot of community input. And I guess I just want to preface I guess I can't preface it because I already asked the question, but I just want to add to this conversation that I'm well aware that there is no one solution that's going to equally serve all families and all of their needs. We don't have the luxury of being able to customize our response. I've appreciated the fidelity to the data, which definitely, from my perspective, does support that there are more benefits to not putting all of our children in a room together from 8 to 4. And so 5 days a week. And so, yeah, I just recognize that hasn't been easy to do. And with so many comments and so many different ways to think about the information, I appreciate that you have stayed the course with the data that I've assessed to be the most reliable. So now my question, when we can't stay in the classroom, how are we going to care for our students and our teachers when that disruption comes?
I'd say a couple things about that. The first is that last time we basically learned on a Thursday that we wouldn't be coming back on a Monday. And we ended up not actually having school that Friday because it was I can't remember if it was a conference day. I think it was a conference day. So we had to make that decision overnight. What I would say is different this time is that we have had a lot of learning. So we understand we're going to understand what it's like to start a school in remote learning, or a school year in remote learning. We're also going to continue to work on what does it look like when our kids do come back into school, because while I shared with Jay, or in response to Jay's questions, we've started to hone in on what does quality remote learning look like. We still have to answer questions about what does it mean when kids come back to school, and how do we make sure that there's safety protocols in place. So honestly, Therese, my concern right now is that transition back, more so than if we have to leave school a second time. What I worry about if we do have to leave school a second time is the emotional toll of that, and understanding how disheartening that's going to be. Yesterday I shared in a quote about the athletics being one more disappointment, and so I feel like we've faced so many disappointments right now that I worry about our sort of that piece of us that starts to kind of get whittled down as we continue to face adversity after adversity. And so I think that at that point, what's going to be most important is that caring connection piece gets elevated and enhanced and further developed. What I appreciate is that kids will have been with those teachers in the scenario you just gave. And so some of that relationship will have been built, which is really going to be hard for us at the beginning of the school year when we can't be face to face. So I think that what I would say in sort of a long answer is that's when we're going to have to totally continue to focus and put our attention on care and connection for our students and families, because then at that point, people are going to feel really down and really sad about the loss of school one more time.
Well, I appreciate that your attention has had to be on how we can have a successful start. And I think that as much as it is logistics, it's also fear as a parent myself about that moment arriving where we have to have that separation again. I do think that the way that the rollout of announcements about changes in our social distancing policies at the state level has been thus far, it isn't something where we are finding out today that go effective tomorrow morning. And so hopefully, we would, if this were to be in this situation, we'd learn on a Tuesday that this is happening starting Friday, and we'd at least be able to give our kids the opportunity to have a face-to-face chance to be involved in, because I think that was probably the hardest part for some of the kids, was simply that when they walked out of the building for the last time, they didn't know it was going to be the last time. And hopefully, should we face that again this time, we can be prepared to help them with that. But anyway, but thank you.
Yeah, one thing I would add just to what you shared is that, so I am out in schools right now visiting because of construction. And I'm going into classrooms that feel that way, that kids were there one day and there's, this weekly schedules on the board and they went home and they didn't come back to school, which completely, it's just sad and disheartening every time I see that. Because that's how quickly the whole thing changed for us. I'm getting kind of emotional just thinking about it. And I think that that's what is worrisome about thinking that that could happen again because of what the implication is, especially for our most vulnerable kids and families, to have that rug pulled out from under them one more time. And that's why I'm trying to be so conservative about giving lots of notice and making a decision and saying this is where we think we have to go, even though I know it stinks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to apologize from the board members who want to speak right now, but I would seek your acceptance that we would transition for recess and then to the next agenda item because we spent lots of time on this, but definitely not enough time. There is so many questions we have, and I want to encourage all board members who have additional questions or comments to send them to Ryan and Lindsey, and we can get an update next week for an answers for those questions. I know we are giving some certainty to our community and to us about what's going on. But one thing I'm certain of, the thoughtfulness and really thinking really critically about what it means to maintain the mission of our educational system, which is to support every child to grow to their fullest potential, prepare them to be capable of navigating an unknown future. And I want to really thank you for maintaining that mission front and center in your work. Thank you. And again, I want to encourage board members to send the questions so we can have a follow-up as soon as possible about that. With that, I want to seek board members' unanimous consent for a period of recess. How does it feel to have a 10 minutes break? So we'll come back at 8:20. Is that sounds good if there's no objections? All right, seeing no objections, we'll have a recess until 8:20. Thank you very much for Ryan and staff for leading the ship. You're great captains navigating a very difficult storm. Thank you. And we'll go for a recess. And this is a 1 minute heads up before we come back from recess.
Sorry, I disappeared for a while back there. I got brought dinner, so.
No worries, you're just in time.
I decided not to chew on camera.
I have done that too, Sarah. I totally understand.
All right, do we have Tina and Therese?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Tina. Awesome.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, we're back in session, reconvening for Corvallis School Board meeting. And I want to really give this topic enough time. So I know Jay, Vince, probably Tina, and also Sarah, you had extra questions. Anyone else have extra questions or comments? I know Ryan is available to answer those questions or any further comments. So I'll give us sufficient time to really have any other things that you want to mention. So let's go with the order where the hands are raised, and let's go back to Sarah.
Thank you for giving me another stab at asking a question. I just continue to be impressed by all of the incredible work that you all have done. I have questions about the DLI program, and it may be things that haven't been worked out yet, but I feel like we are potentially running into a big equity problem for a program that's there to serve our Spanish-speaking students. I worry about students who, because of their own health risk or family risk, are unable to continue in the DLI program next year, and are unable to be in person, so are not able to do the hybrid system. And so is there any way to accommodate those students who are in the DLI program and or the students that's there to serve, so that they can continue or come back to it when we return to attending school on a normal basis?
Yes. Melissa, raise your hand. Melissa, do you want to go first?
So as far as the Corvallis online program, if we have students who are in DLI who have to go to online because of health reasons themselves or their family, that was what Marcianne was alluding to earlier, is that she's working both with Mark Henderson and with Byron on what kinds of options are available within those programs. Specifically, we're looking at how can we maintain that, that high level of Spanish. So that's what she's going to be looking at. She's working with the principals, and she's also bringing a group of teachers together, and that work will start next week. It's definitely on our mind. We completely see it, and we need to do something about it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm also, hearing about high school students who are concerned about their ability to get the seal of biliteracy, which is important to me also, but less important than my first question. So I'm sure you all have thought of all these things, but it's what I'm thinking about and hearing about. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's again, the Marcianne and that group is working through a list of frequently asked questions to be able to respond. On that list are things like the seal of biliteracy. We have several students who attend CV, but are also a part of the DI program. How do we make sure that they still receive that seal when we're not going to have kids crossing campuses next year and some of those pieces? So all those things are a list generated that they're working through. And when our principals are back next week, the principals of our DI schools will be working closely with Marcianne and again, some of our teachers around that curricular piece, but also getting some of those questions answered and out to families. I've been receiving them as well and sharing that as next steps and understanding and recognizing that those questions are coming, and we are generating that list so we can get that information back to families.
All right, next up is Jay. Jay, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Sorry, I'm slow.
No problem.
2 questions. One a real serious one a lesser serious one. We know that we struggled in the spring in classrooms saying we could tell how much kids are learning. It was just virtually impossible. It was so hard of a job. So the question would be, I think as a system, we want to say to ourselves to be accountable and to parents, here's how we know how much we're getting students to learn. Do we have any kind of plan or hope, or are we just going to do our best in terms of assessing growth of our kids? I mean, a specific example might be how many of our kids were able to complete AP exams, because that's sort of an exterior thing that we could go and take tests and see how we compared to other years. But a bigger one is after what, 9 or 10 weeks of no good classroom engagement potentially in the spring, and now 6 weeks, what might we use to measure? That's question one. And I don't know that there's an easy answer. Question number 2, easier one, maybe for Mark Henderson, is could you give us in a public way what the most recent wisdom is on sporting and theater and activities when we're not going to school? What could you tell us all is going to happen to those kids and the things a lot of kids are coming to school for, maybe not for good reasons, but that's kind of one of their big hopes.
So Jay, I'm going to answer both of them because I let staff, told staff that they could get back to their families after the first 90 minutes. And so I'll be answering that one on behalf of Mark. So the first one is around assessment of learning. And I think that one of the things that we're continuing to focus on are what are those essential standards that we really need to make sure kids know in that courses that they're taking. And we will continue to use assessment to measure that. We won't have I don't anticipate, it's hard to know, but I don't anticipate we'll be using those standardized assessments. Last year there was a reprieve on SBAC. I would anticipate there'd be something similar to that this year. It made it hard for me to establish some of my goals for you for this fall, however, or for this school year. However, it makes a lot of sense. So I would say that what we will have will be more teacher-made assessments that they used, which we honestly know are probably the best assessments that we have about knowing how kids are progressing, more so than those standardized assessments that we're required to give every year. So I think we'll be able to still know that. The other conversation we had last spring with teachers was understanding what it might look like as kids came back in the fall, and recognizing that there would be some need to make sure that if there were gaps in learning, that we're filling those as we move into that next either class or grade level in that content area. And then, the second question, so now I'm going to play Mark. With that one, I think that I think that there are kids, and as having been a high school principal, there are kids that are drawn to school because of those extracurriculars that they're a part of. And it is disappointing not to have those right now. I also know that when we don't meet face-to-face, and we're not meeting face-to-face across the whole league, then we can't compete. So yeah, that is going to be a challenge for our kids and families, and a disappointment not to be able to have those opportunities as we think about what the fall looks like in schools typically across the country, and some of those things that build community. We're just going to have to be looking at how do we build community in different ways.
Wonderful. Let's go. Next up is Sarah, and then Vince.
I already got my second stab, so let Vince go ahead.
All right, Vince.
Thanks, Sammy. So Ryan, I'd like to return back to that. You left off just before we went into recess on care and connection. And I really appreciate that you're elevating that and keeping it as a top priority, because kiddos that are in crisis, that are traumatized, aren't able to learn. And I would say the same thing for professionals that are trying to teach, that if they're in crisis as well, they can't effectively teach. So I just want to echo and affirm that needs to be the top priority, that the social emotional well-being of both staff and students has to be top priority, because otherwise we can't fulfill our mission. I'll leave that comment there. I have a dry question for Olivia. Now, Olivia, you mentioned in your comments that there would be use of reserves, and I just would appreciate a little more detail there, and if you expect that you'll be coming to the board to tap into the rainy day fund.
Sure. So we automatically looked at the reserves because our reserves are always based on a percentage of our operating revenues. And the budget assumed full funding of the Student Success Act. And so in the budget preparation process, we had to increase our reserves by quite a bit because our operating revenues were increasing quite a bit, and it's tied as a percent of operating revenues. And so now when we look at our operating revenues shrinking, it allows us to shrink our reserves and still stay within the parameters around the board policy on reserves. And so the change, it doesn't change anything about our compliance with the policy. It's like that proportionate change. Revenues are going down, so we're going to lessen the reserves a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But so what I'm hearing from you is that you're not going to need to tap the rainy day fund this year to balance this budget. You don't expect. We don't know what's going to actually happen. So, but is that your expectation?
As of today, I'm not anticipating that we'll need to tap into our rainy day reserve. But those three things that we're keeping our eyes on are student enrollment, property taxes, and the results of collective bargaining. Those all could have impacts that may require us to revisit that.
Of course, of course. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, do we have any other comments or questions on this topic? All right, see none, we'll transition, but again, a reminder that please send your questions or comments to Ryan and Lindsey, and we'll definitely continue to have follow-ups throughout the rest of the summer and the year. Now, the next item on the agenda is the resolution, the first reading for the review and removal of racist school names. It's a resolution presented by or introduced by Director Vince Adams. And just for clarity for anyone from the community hearing about this and tuning in, you can have access to the material as published and introduced. There is a report, action report, and resolution working draft in the school board meeting material. And today is a discussion. This is the first time it's been introduced, and board members have the opportunity to discuss them. We only discuss in public, and we will not be voting today since it is a first reading. Usually any resolution takes more than one reading. So there is opportunities for the community to send us emails at board email, or to provide public input next week as well. With that, I would like to entertain to give the floor to Vince to speak to the resolution, and then provide an opportunity for board members to speak about any observations, comments, questions, or opinions about it. So Vince, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sammy. And thank you for clarifying that this is just the first read, and that the board and the public will have more opportunities to see this resolution as it moves forward, if it moves forward. So members of the board, before you is a resolution that does two things. First, it removes the names of individuals that held attitudes and practices that were most racist and offensive, in my opinion, because I was the one that made the choices to list those. And for me, there's little room for debate on the racist histories of the three people named. That would be Herbert Hoover, Woodrow Wilson, and Thomas Jefferson. And the standard that I used to judge these individuals was their affinity for racist beliefs, not necessarily practice of slavery, because they lived at different times in American history. The second thing that it does is it launches a process for our community to have a conversation that otherwise wouldn't happen. And it is intended to explicitly bring a diverse group of people together in each of our education communities to look at the school names and what they represent, and if that is in alignment with the values of the district and of the community. So you're probably wondering, Vince, why are you doing this right now? Well, I'll be honest, it's part of the season right now. We know we're seeing the Black Lives Movement in media all the time. But I'll tell you that it was earlier this summer, Princeton University removed the name of Woodrow Wilson from one of their buildings. And this was what really reminded me of conversations that I had had with one of our principals, Eric Beasley. And this is my time to apologize to him, because I've had a few conversations, and while I heard him, I didn't listen closely enough. I probably should have brought this resolution a couple of years ago. For that, I'm sorry, but this is something that he and his education community have been talking about and working towards. But across the country, we are seeing school boards taking up resolutions around anti-racism. And I was actually proud last month that our board chose not to just take up I don't want to say generic necessarily, but just a resolution stating our commitment to an anti-racist agenda. Instead, choosing to just take action. And so since that meeting, I have been reflecting on what our board could do. What action can a school board do? And changing school names is something that we can do. And, buildings are being renamed all over the country right now. And it just seems like high time. And if we don't do it now, I would beg the question, when should we take up this resolution and do this work? Well, I'll be honest, it was my conscience that compelled me to do something and move forward with this. I was really troubled. I am troubled by the message that we are sending to children that attend these schools. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that. Oh, no, wait, I have one more thing I need to say. I need to clarify what this resolution is not doing, or what it's not intended to do. It's not intended to erase American presidents and their accomplishments from history or its education. I've personally admired Thomas Jefferson and Woodrow Wilson since I learned about them as a child. And the accomplishments of Thomas Jefferson have been a touchstone for me my whole life. This resolution is not a first step towards removing presidents from American history curriculum. Children can't learn about the founding of the nation or the creation of the League of Nations, or even the descent into the Great Depression without learning about the accomplishments of these presidents. And the last thing I want to mention here is that above all, this resolution must not distract the district or this community from the important work that educators and our partners are doing to support children in this time of need. While the work of this resolution is very important, we must always keep our students at the center of our thinking. And I'm bringing this resolution this time with the full knowledge that it will take likely a couple of years to fulfill its mandate. But right now, as we just heard from our staff, they need to keep their focus on launching the next school year. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate your remarks, and I want to open the floor for board members. You can speak to or against or provide your opinions or questions, and we'll go one round for all board members first, and then we can go again with the second time comments. First, we'll go with Vice Chair Sarah Finger McDonald. You're muted.
Still muted.
Okay, it said I was unmuted, but I was wrong. Or it was wrong. So Vince, thank you for bringing this resolution. I had heard comments from members of the community about school names over the last couple months also. And as a Virginian, I learned history proudly discussing the accomplishments of Thomas Jefferson and his critical role in writing the document that our government is founded on, and the aspirational words that he wrote. Unfortunately, Thomas Jefferson himself in his personal life did not live up to those aspirations. And he was hoping other people down the line would solve the problem of slavery for him. That's not what I learned in school. But our understanding of history now is much more of a both and. He was both a critical founding father who gave us the structure of our government in this amazing document. And he was a man who believed that Black people were less than white people and that it was okay to own them. Woodrow Wilson played an incredible role in establishing the role of the United States in the world and the founding of the League of Nations. And he was a racist who actively segregated our federal government and removed the voice of Black people and opportunities from Black people and did not allow them to access the new freedom that he talked about. Herbert Hoover, also racist, thought that Black people were less than white people. And he was also one of our presidents who was, there at the start of the Great Depression and is, played a role in the history there. These are important things to understand. It's important to understand the both and I want our children to understand the both and, because none of us are Black, well, other than, these artificial racial designations, we are not Black or white. We are shades of gray in our moral standing and actions in the world. And that's a critical thing to know. Does it make me, it made me uncomfortable to think about removing the name of Thomas Jefferson from a school to some extent because of the great contributions he's made. But we're talking about the name of a school. This is different than a monument in Washington, D.C. in the seat of our government that's celebrating the founding of our government. This is a school where children attend. And where I came down as I thought about the names of schools was that children should not be asked to go to a school named after someone who thought they were less than, who thought they were not possible, it was not possible for them to achieve the same things that their peers could achieve. And so when we're thinking about school names need to be inspirational for everyone, not just the privileged few. So Vince, thank you very much for bringing this. I am very glad to see it move forward, or hopeful to see it move forward. And I think it's something that will be important to some of our kids, all of our kids, I hope.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is Jay and then Therese. Director Jay Conroy.
Can you hear me? I have a couple thoughts. As a history teacher, and for the record, who supplemented our AP US history book with Zen People's History, I felt it was absolutely critical for our kids to understand that there were no saints in US history or in any history. There's nobody perfect. And Zen does a good job of pointing out some of our traditional heroes and their problems and some of our traditional policies. And I really believe that's good for kids to learn. So how does that fit with naming schools? If I were a school board back in the 1950s and decided on ways to name schools, I would not have picked Hoover and I would not have picked Wilson. Somebody thought those were important. Somebody as smart as me, perhaps, maybe smarter, thought those were absolutely good things to do. And my problem with the resolution is twofold. One, it's saying, number one, there's an emergency and we should cancel 3 named schools in effect, I think, in 2 weeks, because we have another board meeting that meets next week, and we could wrap this up in 2 weeks with almost no deliberation or community input. And to me, that's a major problem. But secondly, no great analysis of what would be good school names and why are these not good school names? Because Sarah, you do a great job of capturing the goodness of Jefferson, but also his big warts. There's no one who doesn't have warts. I'm sorry, that's a fundamental. And so what I'm concerned is that A, we are pushing through potentially quickly, and B, without great input. And then finally, there is, I think, room for question. Again, if you asked me to take a vote, I probably wouldn't put Mr. Wilson if we had a new school to name. He wouldn't be my top list. I also believe we are grossly inadequate in terms of naming women and in terms of naming people of color or minorities who have made great contributions or should be aspirational. So I think we have lots of room to grow in, but I just don't want us to do it without doing a lot of thought. My final point is that we have received within 2 days of the newspaper article a ton of input. I have gotten the same board letters that you all have and then a few more, and they are saying, whoa, stop, especially around Jefferson. This is not a good idea. And finally, we'd like some input. So my recommendation is that before we leave this topic tonight, we reach some understanding about how quickly this might move. I gave to you all some quick research that I did on how other boards have structured naming policies. And my biggest request is that we look at those policies not as the magic, not Eugene doesn't have all the answers, but they, I think, capture a really good process for when you're naming or renaming, you do some heavy duty committee work and community input, and you take some people's thoughts, and then you bring back to the board some recommendations. But I don't think that's what this resolution is about. This is about doing away with names, which would be very hard to bring back up as far as acceptable names. And so I'm really concerned about what we've got going. I appreciate you, Vince and Sammy and Sarah, and what you're getting to, but I don't think we're doing it in a thoughtful, deliberative, transparent way that really needs to be done. My last comment, and I promise it is my last, I am absolutely concerned about our racial equity. And we need to talk to the public about all the good things we are doing to improving that. I don't think school naming is the one that we want to hang our hat on and do a lot of divisive conversation, but I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Before I move to Therese, I want to really thank you for laying out a couple of points of discussion, and I want board members to note them down if they want to speak to one point of discussion. I can note here that the speed was an element, and also community input was another element. so we could speak to each one of them after we go with full round with board members. But also I want to note a point of clarification to the community. If there is no objection, there's documents that Director Jake Conroy shared with the board over email. And if there's no objection, there will be part of the meeting material after the end of the meeting. The public can examine those documents. And the documents that Jay mentioned is in relation to Corvallis School Board Policy FF as Frederick, and FF-AR, and similar policies from other school districts as well. So thank you, Jay, for doing that homework and sharing that documents, and they will be available for the community after the end of this meeting. So next up is Therese.
Thanks, Sammy. Oh, let me turn this off. It's kind of loud. Sorry about that. So before I make my comments and ask my questions, I noticed that the resolution did have co-sponsors, and I wanted to ask if either of the co-sponsors wanted to add anything to Vince's presentation of kind of the process, because I would hate to make a comment that in fact actually your reflections might address in advance. So I'd love to comment, and I would like to ask if you have anything that you would like to add.
Lou, would you like to claim the floor and give any remarks at this stage?
I'm okay just waiting as we do the rounds. Therese, I appreciate that. I don't know how you feel, Sammy, but just it's helpful for me to hear the perspectives, because when you put something together and you work on something, sometimes it didn't come across as clearly as we had hoped. So maybe some of the stuff you say will bring some of that up if that's a concern.
So yeah, I'm okay with that too. I'll speak to the motion and to the resolution. A little bit conflicted. Usually chairs are supposed to be unbiased and say who wants to speak for and against, but I will speak very passionately about it. But I'll give you the opportunity, Therese, to say what you want, and I would really appreciate your perspective. And if we overlap with our thoughts, that's completely fine.
Well, thank you both. It's not so much that I have criticisms or feedback or gaps I've identified, so much as I just wanted to make sure, since more than one person contributed to the formation, that everyone felt comfortable that the kickoff to this conversation felt okay to you. So if you are okay with that, then I'll go ahead and make a couple of comments and for us to think about. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so some of my comments were kind of inspired directly as a result of reading the public comments that came to us. That got me to think a little bit about, yeah, it's a great question. What does it mean that we're going to reread our history and go back and look at it? And of course, we've got this hindsight now. And so how can we apply that to people who aren't here anymore and lived in a different time and things like that? Things that people thoughtfully put together and shared with us that prompted me to do some thinking. And so a couple of thoughts that I have. The first thing that I wanted to say is that these three individuals for whom I had prior to this varying degrees of knowledge about their specific contributions. I was thankful to be married to a history major in this conversation who could point me in the direction of some concise but meaningful readings to help me contextualize what exactly Hoover did as a president. It was not, I really couldn't name something that he had done. And so it was helpful to find some sources for that. So I did try to read up on that. So the first comment that I want to make is that I appreciate that the work of Jefferson and Wilson and Hoover has a historical context. As all of us do, we live as a contributor in a bidirectional place of reciprocity between the environment and the time that we find ourselves in and the person that we are. And we make our mark on it and it makes its mark on us. And so we cannot ignore when a person has been, what they have been through, what they have seen, what they have participated in, as we try to understand what they think, what they've done, their accomplishments, their contributions, their flaws as well. So I'm appreciative of that. And I think that it would be very unrealistic for us to expect to go back to, particularly in Jefferson's period, well, honestly, all of them, but I'll just say it would be unrealistic of us to go back to that period in time and expect to find a preponderance of people who do not hold racist views, because we have an entrenched history of racism in our country. Our country is literally built on racist principles of white and European superiority. And so I don't think that that's a very helpful lens to say, well, you know, they look like their time. They do look like their time. And I don't know that we would find people that don't look like their time. So given the historical context, this is my thought. These individuals probably made some contributions that are super important and that we run into all the time. The question that I have to ask is if the contributions that they have made are in service to everyone and actually support equity. And I think you can make a case for each one of them, as you probably could for most leadership, sadly, probably even until today, that there is a backbone of racist ideology that informs what they perceive to be good. When I look at the Declaration of Independence, I'm appreciative that that was certainly quite an accomplishment to write that and to take the steps to enact the idea of a free society. But we know that even as they were writing it, they did not intend it to be a free society for everyone. And so rather than exalting the thinkers who put that together, I think they were aware that they didn't have everyone in mind. And I don't know that we get to let them off the hook because they were culturally, it was culturally expected that they wouldn't have everyone in mind. It was still wrong to not have everyone in mind. And I think we can say that. So in social policy, we have a phrase that we use. It's a feature, not a bug in a system. If you keep finding something over and over and over again that looks like an unintended consequence, it's not a bug, it's a feature of the system. We built the system exactly to do that. And our Declaration of Independence built a system to leave people out. So I don't look at that and say, well, it was an unfortunate, unintended consequence of its time. I look at it and say, no, they did exactly what they meant to do with that. Why they meant to do it, I'm not privy to. If they ever thought about doing it differently, we may not know. But the fact remains that many of the things that we would see as accomplishments by these thinkers have been accomplishments that have benefited a particular group of people and not others. My second thought is in response to statements around how history remembers people and the need to be understanding of the cultural limitations, somehow meaning that we have to allow their legacy to be preserved and keep their name on something. So what I would like to say is I don't know 50 years from now what will happen. I have no idea. I hope that my son and his generation is part of pushing the issues of equity much, much further than I ever even could envision, because we've given them a platform to work from. And if 50 years from now, if they were to look back and they were to say, Therese Jones got it wrong on this, I hope that they will hear now that I am saying, please take my name down. If you think I got it wrong, because I'm sure that I have gotten it wrong in some places, my heart is to see this work move forward, always to be moving forward. And my expectation of the next generation is that they will be critical of our shortcomings, because I don't know how they will grow if they're not. And so I'm not afraid of our shortcomings, because I expect them to be present, and I expect that the good work of the children that we are educating and raising in our district will later find those shortcomings, and then they will do the hard work to address them. And if in doing so, I made comments, thought things, promoted ideas that are detrimental and work contrary to the good work they are trying to do, I don't want to be honored because I made a good effort. So I'm okay with my name being taken down. And if these men were the thinkers, and if the spirit of the contribution that they made is what some members of our community have stated it to be, I don't know how they couldn't agree with that statement and recuse themselves. Lastly, I wanted to say that some feedback came around tensions of focusing on racist comments that seemed to highlight or elevate comments made, individuals who made comments about African Americans, about Black history in particular. And a couple of comments that came our way indicated that we are being short-sighted in pretending somehow that Indigenous populations were performed better than white people do in terms of how they treat their community members. And to that, I would say that when you are part of a group of people who came in and took what was not yours, you surrender your right to critique how that community manages its own self, how they respond to the limitations or the cultural relevance of their own history. We don't get to do that. That's not our place. So there are people in our community who can advise us about the appropriate way to respond. And those are people who actually have a history within the Indigenous communities. And I am quite certain that if we call on them, they will do that. They will help. And as a white person, I need to step aside and trust that, that they are able to adequately help us to understand why or how it is that we can recognize their contributions, even in the times when what we think we are observing runs counter to our values. I would just remind our community that we killed a lot of people who were already here because we didn't like how they were doing things that absolutely were benign, fine, healthier even than some of the things that we were doing, healthier than the practices that we brought with us. So it is not very meaningful to me to hear from the white community that we need to bring a critical lens to the practices of Indigenous people before we ever got here. And I hope that that point was clear. And then the only thing that I want to say about this is that I would like us to be mindful of the timeline. I am concerned about bandwidth overload of the amount of things that we are asking our families to process right now. And not because I think that we shouldn't move forward in trying to pursue this, but simply because there are so many places right now where people and some of our most marginalized community members don't have a lot of voice and don't have a lot of control over what is happening to them. I do want to make sure that our plan forward finds an inclusive way to allow people to be heard, even opinions that might dissent from what gets expressed by the board members this evening. I think that that's it. I think that that's an important process. And so I would ask us to, as part of this process, come up with some kind of a timeline that we feel confident doesn't force families to contend with both that their children are going to be home for 6 weeks and wrestle with that they might not even get realistically to go back after. Some counties are having their phases rolled back right now, and also make time tomorrow to comment on this for us if they haven't yet. So I don't think it's something we should kick down the road very far. I do think it's something that it would probably be a bit much for us to ask to take a vote on this in 2 weeks, but perhaps in the meeting after might be a timeline that I think could be comfortable. And then the other thing that would be helpful is if we could declare more deliberately and specifically the criteria that has been applied, because as was mentioned, everyone has a questionable past. There's a reason why this particular questionable past is being addressed and maybe others are not. And I think that it would be smart for us to call it what it is. And Vince said that, and I appreciated his acknowledgement of that this is timely for things that are happening in our world. And we could dig around and find things in everyone's past, but we don't have to dig very hard to find undisputed issues with these 3 particular individuals that are very timely to issues that we are talking about right now. So if we could just declare that criteria, that might help assuage some of the community that this is some kind of a targeted witch hunt, that it is not, but that in fact there was a rationale that was applied, that might be helpful. And that's all that I have to share. Thank you very much for the hard work. And yeah.
Vince, I see your hands up. Would you like
Yeah.
to respond?
Sammy, I can speak to the criteria and how I looked at each president, if that would be helpful for the board.
Absolutely. Please go ahead. If Tina, you're okay with giving the floor to Vince, and then we'll go back to you. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
So yeah, the essentially what I did is after I heard about Princeton and them removing the name of Woodrow Wilson from one of their buildings, I went and looked at who he was and his background. And he was an avowed racist and segregationist. And for me, that disqualified him. Herbert Hoover was a social Darwinist. He was an engineer by training, and some of his professional writing was repugnant, is a nice way to say it. He talked about the differential productivity of the different races. He also helped orchestrate a purge of the Republican Party, purging Black people from the Republican Party. He was a racist fellow. Thomas Jefferson was a committed slave owner. And if you look at the public comment that we've received so far and the conversation that we've had, I think that's the one that most of us have difficulty with. John Adams, or John Quincy Adams, I don't know for whom the school is named, but either one of them, as far as I know, they didn't own slaves, and I couldn't find any, if they expressed any opinion about the practice of slavery. Some people have asked why I didn't include Benjamin Franklin. Franklin owned at least 2 slaves in his lifetime, but late in his life, he disavowed the practice of slavery. James Garfield was actually anti-slavery, and he ran and won on an equal rights platform. Some people have asked about Abraham Lincoln because when he ran for the Senate, he was an avowed racist and swore that he would never advocate for equal rights between whites and Blacks. But in the course of 7 years, his thinking changed, and it was a speech where he did advocate for equal rights for Blacks that incensed John Wilkes Booth so much that he killed him. Mountain View is an anodyne name. It's non-controversial. Linus Pauling, I think most of us know who Linus Pauling is and the work that he does. He did. He actually had a correspondence with Martin Luther King, but there are questions about eugenics, and I don't know. It was not clear, so I didn't include him. The last one is Vernon Sheldon, who is a biochemist who lived here locally, and he was a longtime school board member. And he died at the age of 50, tragically. So really it was how strident their adherence or affinity for racist ideology was how I chose the 3 names. And I can speak more about my views around Thomas Jefferson, but I want to give time to the rest of the board to speak.
Thanks, Vince. I'll go next for board members who didn't speak yet. So next up is Tina, and then Jay. Actually, I might recognize myself after Tina, if Jay, you're okay with that. All right, Tina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for Vince, LaHoy, and Sammy for bringing this forward to us as a board to consider. I feel that it's a catalyst for anti-racism work that also aligns with our vision and alignment with cultural and racial equity. This is a way to open up conversations with our community and our staff and administration around why do we name places, things, and what's the thought process behind that. And most of the time that is to honor people, right? So if we're honoring people, then we need to start looking at how that plays into representation and how important that is to our families or families of color. And how do we want to go about renaming this? I would like to see that we gain some input from different families from different backgrounds, so we get input from everybody, because representation matters. And I think since it's getting late, I'll just throw it back out to you, Sammy.
Thank you. If there's no objection, I'll recognize myself to speak for the motion or for the resolution. I want to thank yes, go ahead, Lou.
Do I get to, what, am I going after you? Because I think us two are the only ones that haven't gone.
Oh, that's true. I apologize. Yes. And if you want to go ahead first,
You
that's
can go, I just wanted before you called, because I know other people have their right. Go ahead, you already.
That's correct. Okay. So I want to say first, thank you, Vince, for your leadership on it. Lou, on community members who reached out, connected with us. And I know we are actually following the lead of community members. You might not have seen letter to the editor campaigns. You might have not seen the traditional ways where people talk about that, but we hear the community members, especially community members and students of color who say this is something that we need to discuss. And we are following their lead. Now, one sentence that should summarize the motive, the need, and the purpose of this resolution is the following. School names should inspire our students and the community. What inspires me is not what inspires the generation that's in K through 12 right now. What inspired the nation 100 years ago is not what inspires the nation that's completely different today. I would claim the most American thing about this nation is always getting better. So what inspires our students today is something better. And I have to say, I owe it to our founding fathers, despite of their fallibilities. But I know definitely for those who were owned by those founding fathers, probably they would not think highly of their owners as much as white America 100 or 200 or 300 years ago thought about the founding fathers. So we are inspired by their actions, some of it, and some of it does not inspire us anymore. I can't fathom with what I learned from this process so far that we could assume our students of color, a Black girl, will be motivated and inspired to be in a school that's named of someone who thought less of her and she could achieve less than her white peer or male peers. And for that, I really thank Jay for highlighting something very important about the problem of not recognizing women. Out of our schools, none of them recognizes women. I do have respect to the office of the presidency. It's an amazing and awesome office. And those who hold this hold a huge responsibility, moral and other responsibilities. And I want to highlight this resolution is about, imagine there is 12 or 13 spotlights. Those spotlights like the Batman movie, but they're on a school, on a neighborhood. And that spotlight is where our children look up and at it and they say, this is why I can do better. This is where I can succeed. This is where I can find my potential power to be a public servant, a scientist, an engineer, an artist, whatever it is. And I can see myself there. And school names are part of that inspiration. And that's the dynamic process of changing school names into what inspire our students better. while it's almost clear, if it's not very clear, that some of the names include sins that are horrendous. We are not here to cast the stones of who's the sinner and who's the saint. And none of us are a complete sinner or a complete saint, as far as I know. And because of that, we need to recognize what we're doing here is not a measure of sainthood, it's a measure of who needs to be recognized today and tomorrow and for the next 10, 12, 50 years. As far as we know, that person or that name will be the most inspiring for our students. That's the motive. This is a student and a children problem. It's not an adult problem. And we should follow their lead, telling us who inspires them. And for that, I want to highlight the two elements of the resolution that I really appreciate how Vince developed it or designed it. And I support that. The first element speaks to what we should do in terms of recognizing that problem and provide an opportunity for at least 3 schools to be up for grabs for what inspires our students most. So we're taking the names out, we're opening up the discussion, and that action will not happen unless we pass the resolution. And passing any resolution usually does not happen, and we will not happen. We have the commitments unless we hear from the community and from our students' families through mediums of public participation. But the second element of the resolution, which is very important, is engaging our staff and community members and students' communities to really, and school community to really tell us, the board, this is what we recommend you to do. This is what's inspire our students most. So while the board by policy is empowered to make those decisions, we are obligated to make sure this process is driven by our community and by our students first and foremost. So with that, I feel really motivated. I still have the dream personally to one day I have the honor to swear an oath of office using an Arabic Bible, which inspired me to really understand other religions in a language that's close to me, the Constitution, the American Constitution, and on top of all of these two is Jefferson's Quran. And I feel inspired by the idea that he was interested in the faith that I subscribe to. However, I want to check my bias here. Is that the metric that I should use? No. The metric I should use is what inspire all of our students today. With that, I yield for Lou next.
Well, I'm just like still listening to processing you were saying, Sammy, thank you. Well, there's a few things that I wanted to point out, and if it's not clear, I'm pretty much in favor of what's been presented since my name's on there as well. But some of the things I did want to point out from some of the messaging and some of the comments made tonight is the whole idea of people being like men of their time. And thanks to Jay for pointing out that these are all men. That's very clear that that time period wasn't inclusive of anybody that looked like me or other community members. It wasn't inclusive of all of my identities, actually, because I'm not a white male. And in fact, there's been a lot of positives talked about with Jefferson and as a founding father and declaration. And it's always important to remember that Indigenous peoples were viewed as merciless Indian savages at that time and are still described that way in the Declaration of Independence. And that was the mindset that founded this country. And that's I think it's something that people should really think about. Think about that. Merciless Indian savages, like, we're subhuman. We're not worthy of even being alive. That launched or continued under a new government to launch a whole series of war for land acquisition against people like myself and other Indigenous community members in this city. And so to me, it's history is complicated. And I also teach American history, but I teach it through ethnic studies. And so I understand the complicated histories, understanding all these multiple views and sides of history. And right now we're upholding a very one-sided history and not looking at all the nuances. I think that people just need to remember that when they're describing people, and they may have been men of their times, but it's a way to kind of dismiss the genocide and slavery and, quite honestly, spousal abuse that was going on during that time as acceptable. And living descendants on the receiving end of those atrocities still feel those impacts today. Like, those are lived experiences that we feel because of those actions. That doesn't mean we're blaming people, the residents of Corvallis, that share identities with these people that the schools are named after. We're not blaming anybody for that. What we're asking is for that to be acknowledged along with the other things as have been described earlier. I see this as a really good opportunity for the community to be able to be involved with something that's really educational. And that's one of the things that excited me the most about this. It's not like we want to say, if we want to take away all these names, there's actually, we're not saying they have to be renamed immediately either. Nobody said that this wasn't going to be a process. And Vince actually mentioned earlier, like, we're looking at a couple years down the road, it'll probably take to do all the research to rename a school. But I'm excited that it involves parents, students, how it's outlined in the resolution, of people to be involved in the process, members of the community with lived experiences around race and expertise in social justice. A lot of times people are left out of these kind of conversations on what to name something as significant as a school building. And this is an opportunity to bring those voices in. And so if you think about how awesome that is for students to be able to do research and say, like, hey, yeah, we know nobody's perfect, but like, did they intentionally perpetuate the things that are outlined? Did they intentionally perpetuate white dominance through slavery and racist and anti-Indigenous views? Like, was that an intentional thing that they were doing? And so there is some like guidelines in there already of like what we're looking at. And to have at least one school in Corvallis, I really like that part, that has a name that honors the local Indigenous people in consultation with the tribes. We're on their land, let's be real about it. We've always been on, this has always been their land. It's always has been and always will be Kalapuya land. And involving the two tribes in honoring that relationship with their land, if they would like a school named after something important to them, I think honors that history and that continued relationship that they have with Corvallis. A lot of people don't know how much the local tribes contribute to the city, or that like the Siletz tribe helped build the new Benton County Museum downtown. They contributed to that for the community because this is also still their community and they care about these lands. So to me, that was really awesome. And then I know that on here too, I don't know how much community read the actual, like read every line of the resolution and what stood out the most to them. But one of the things that I was really excited about in the resolution too, right now, like where my kids go to school, they don't learn about the people the schools are named after outside of like the history class. So like at Lincoln, they don't have this learning about who he was, the multiple sides of him. They just know they go to Lincoln and there's a picture of him there, right? But what we're proposing in this resolution, which I hope community would be excited about, I'm excited about it if you can't tell because I keep saying that, but is to not just have interpretive signage on the site, but also to integrate progressive curriculum in those schools. So each school would be learning every year something more about the person they're named after that's grade appropriate. And so by the time, like if they're either getting 5, 3, 4 years of schooling, progressively learning more things about this individual or this place that this school is named after. And it kind of brings not just the students, but the teachers and the rest of the staff a little bit closer into what that name means and to really like be part of it. And so to me, that was a part that I really liked in the resolution too. But all that to say, like we really value, as it's been said, the community input. And whatever your thoughts, if you like it, or if you have some critique of it, you know how to get a hold of us through the email. All of our emails are on the board site. And I hope that people will look at it with an open mind and recognize that we're not trying to rip away history. We're trying to tell other parts of history, and we're trying to help students learn in that process, and families and community members engage in a mutual learning process together. And to me, that's really important.
Thank you, Lou. I'm not sure who's next. I believe probably we have Tina, and then Therese, and then Jay, and then Vince.
No, mine's a mistake, Sammy. I'm taking it.
Okay. Tina, would you like to speak?
I'm taking it down. I don't need to now. Thank you.
All right. So next is Jay, and then Vince. And after Vince, I'll ask Ryan. He might have some operational questions that he would like to ask as well. So next up is Jay, and then Vince, and then Ryan.
So I really appreciate the conversation we've had tonight and the perspectives. I don't agree with everybody's understanding and perception of history, but I think that's called history. It's not science H plus O equals water or whatever. History is about perspectives. And so to me, we're highlighting the nature of history. And our job as a school board, I think, is to pull all these different perspectives together, think about what our role is in terms of inspiring students, providing for good facilities. I don't want to name a school Sunshine School because it has no danger to anybody. I love inspiration, but I will tell you that inspiration has to come with really good education at the 4th grade and 8th grade and 11th grade that explains who Harding was or who Hoover was or who Jefferson was. And that can be inspirational. It can be absolutely inspirational. It doesn't have to be something that's thrown out. So I guess what I'm not real clear on is the timeline and the criteria. That is, if we aren't in agreement, then I need to put forth a motion that says we will slow this down and put together a good study committee. And in my humble opinion, we could name 3 schools that should be studied, and public should have an opportunity to weigh in, pluses and minuses, and then we will take the recommendations. But the resolution that sits on the table right now says we are going to cancel 3 names and then do a study. And I don't think that's good process. And so I'm looking for how open the sponsors are to my suggestion, which is to send it to kind of a 4J committee that says, let's look at input and people's comments and commit to saying, I have no trouble. I'll name my name right now. I have no trouble saying that Hoover and Wilson would not be people that I would, if I had a chance, support names. Jefferson is something else. And I would love to hear other people's suggestions and weighing in. I'm a history student, but I don't have all the history. So I'm kind of looking for guidance before I do the parliamentary thing, which is then I'm going to make everybody go on record as saying, we're going to push this thing through in 2 weeks and we're going to cancel people's names right now. That's not good politics. That's not good policy. And I'm looking for where you guys want to go.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay. So I would recommend after Vince probably addresses some of those questions, and then Ryan ask us some questions as well, we could have pathways on language that we can deliberate on next meeting. And between now and then, you and Vince probably could add that question or that possible alteration, and we can talk about it right now as well.
Can I interject really quick? I'm sorry, Vince, but like, I think it's really important that we don't say like we're canceling people, because nobody is being canceled in this process. It's a request to rename a school. Like, nothing in it is canceling people from the curriculum or history or anything like that. And I just want to make sure that was clear to viewers that are watching this, that that's not what's being asked, because words are important.
So just for clarification, we are saying that those 3 schools' names will not be their names, and then we'll go look for 3. So I use the word cancel because it's a shorthand phrase that says it's not going to be the name anymore. But what other name you would say would be, I have no trouble with.
Right, because right now that's actually a terminology that's being used as like cancel culture, and that came through in some of our emails, and I just wanted to make sure that's not exactly what we're doing and saying. I just wanted to clarify that for viewers that are familiar with that terminology.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with the meaning of that terminology. I'm not sure there's a dictionary that defines it, but my understanding when they say someone is canceled contemporarily right now, it means that person goes into infamy. You're just deleting them from history, and no one talks to them, no one learns about them. And that's my understanding. I think I might be wrong. Probably I am. But the clarification of what Lou said, I think that's very good representation of the intention and the results of this resolution. We're still going to learn about our presidents, and I'm not sure if we count them or we learn about their history the same way that we do. And actually, this activity will help us learn more about them, to my understanding. However, what we're doing is we're highlighting and putting a spotlight on who we think inspire our children most, rather than canceling an individual with the verb cancel. Okay, so with that, Jay, is there any other stuff you want to say, or shall I transition to Vince? Awesome, thank you. So Vince, you're up next.
Thank you. I was remiss earlier. I didn't express my appreciation for you and Lou and the members of the community that helped me develop this language. It certainly was not in a vacuum, and I certainly didn't do it by myself. So thank you for that. And Jay, thank you for your caution. I realize that item 1 in this resolution is heavy-handed, and I have struggled with it. I've struggled with it for the reasons that you've cited, that it isn't good politics. Frankly, this whole thing probably may cost me re-election next year. I don't know. It's certainly not the comfortable course, but I think I need to explain myself a little bit more about why I singled out these 3 particular presidents in particular. And it really goes to, it's very subjective, really. It's my experience as a dad. And what I did is I thought, what message does having Herbert Hoover or Woodrow Wilson or Thomas Jefferson on a school send to a child walking into that school? The reality is that Thomas Jefferson, may have owned upward of 600 slaves. And we think about him in the context of when he lived, but he had people around him that counseled him against the practice of slavery. I know that he had a friend that was in France. Slavery was illegal in France, that visited with him and repeatedly counseled him against the practice of slavery. But what really, and I have to say that Thomas Jefferson is someone I have looked to as a guidepost around governance. He is the architect of American democracy. But the fact that he fathered 6 children with a woman that he owned, I can't justify that to my daughter who's right outside that door. And I think about a little Black girl walking into Jefferson Elementary, and what am I saying? What is this board saying? What is the school district saying to that little girl? What are we saying to her family by holding up Thomas Jefferson for all the great things that he did, but he did very bad things too. And it's just too far. And that's why I retained item 1 in this resolution, because it's really a moral argument. Is this something that we can tolerate? Is this something that we can justify to our children? And it's not something that I can justify. I can't rationalize my way to retaining these figures on schools. And that's why I kept item 1 in the resolution. And I've talked to people who have counseled me, Jay, that said, this is bad politics. It may cost the district down the road. but it really comes down to a moral question. And I chose to present it with item 1, and that's why. So thank you. And I deeply appreciate this conversation. This is not something that I can do alone. It takes the board to do this. It will take the whole community. And that is why item 2 is really the larger portion of the resolution. It's because I trust the community to do the right thing. And in my heart of hearts, I think that if we took the action that you're suggesting, Jay, that if we just referred this to the community, I'm sure that those names would come off of those schools. But I don't want a child on September 9th. I don't want a child, if, of course, we're not going to be able to open the school, but I don't want a child to have to go to a Thomas Jefferson Elementary School. I don't want that little girl to have to walk in that building, whether it's virtually or really, or for real. So I yield back. Thank you. And I'd love to hear Ryan's thoughts on process, and if you have any questions about our intent.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Vince. And Brian, the floor is yours.
So as I've listened, a couple of questions have come up for me. The first one is, so as I have listened and thought about process, one of the aspects of process that we have tended to use has been a superintendent's task force. And in those instances, we have a charter document that we've used. And so the examples I can think of are a fundraising task force. We used that a number of years ago. We've used it for the boundaries to have clarity about what processes were going to be followed. We've used it for, what else have we used it for as of late? A couple of other times we've used it. Whenever we've had a superintendent committee that's been working, long-range facilities planning, we had that too. We've identified what are our goals and objectives, what's the scope, what's the proposed task force membership look like in terms of numbers, as well as making sure that it has diverse voice and perspective of our community. Who are those liaisons or ex officio members? How often were those teams meeting? Procedures and processes, how those recommendations are communicated, and if there's any policy adoption related to that. And then also how long will that committee be ongoing, so the sunset clause. And so what I'm wondering is, what I hear are a number of process questions, both from community members and from the board. And so I'm just wondering if it would be beneficial, because we're going to have another conversation about this either at August 6th. Right now, that was sort of the plan but if that needs to be pushed back, that's a consideration I think you all need to make. But whenever it comes back forward, I think spending some time on my end, putting this into this charter document will give it some bones and structure. And that would, I think, help the conversation. And it could also clarify what that process is going to look like. I think Vince did a nice job of trying to, I see that this document sort of laid out in the resolution. And so I don't think it will be difficult for me to modify and put into this format, but I think it would be helpful to have it in this format, because I think it would help the conversation to be moved forward. And I think it would also be helpful for the community to see it in this format, because again, I think it helps people to understand, first of all, what the process is going to look like, and second of all, how we're going to make sure that community is involved in it. And I think those are really two important pieces for consideration. So as I've listened, that's how I'm thinking about it in terms of structure and moving it forward. And so I think what I would suggest is that whatever meeting that is, I'm going to take the time to put this into this charter document, bring it forward as well, so that can help to facilitate the conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. Vince?
So thank you, Ryan. That's exactly what I was hoping for. The other thing is that I want to just share that I think taking the time and getting this right is more important than doing it quickly. I think that we are going to hear a lot more from the community in the coming days, and I think that that's healthy. And I knew that that would happen as soon as this went public, and that was part of the intended consequences is to engage the public in this conversation. So thank you, Ryan, for that. And I think that we should take whatever time is necessary without losing operational capacity, because I know that we do have committees, we have groups of people around in our bond work that could help us in engaging this. So I don't want to lose that opportunity, but I also don't want to go too fast. This needs to be a deliberative process. Right.
Jay, before I go to you, I want to clarify from Ryan, the proposal of a charter, personally, I'm in support of it, and I would like to see the board if there's agreement for that too. But the charter idea in terms of process, it would apply whether we stick with step number 1, step number 2, or just go for step number 2. It could apply for both scenarios. Is that correct?
I think step number 1 is a conversation the board needs to have. If we move away from using those names for schools immediately, I think that's a conversation that won't necessarily change the structure of the committee or the participation or those aspects around timelines. So to me, it feels like there's 2 pieces. One is actually 3. One is, do we are those names removed from the schools at this point in time, or are those names maintained until a decision is made for a new name? Second to that would be, once that decision is made, a timeline for those committees to come together and make a recommendation to the board. I saw in the document that there's the opportunity to make several recommendations for a couple of options to bring that back to the board. I think that makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, it's the board that needs to make that decision. And I think that allowing community to bring forward a couple of different ideas is beneficial. So anyhow, I think that that's a good aspect to this. One of the other questions I have is, I saw the piece about doing some study and investigation around the names on other schools. And I don't know how, where was that? Wasn't that in here? Or did I just make that up?
I wouldn't recommend doing it before the board approves the resolution.
Yeah.
I think it was.
But in terms of timeline, it almost feels like those are 2 parallel activities.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you. I think this gives us a really good perspective. I think we should take the time, but also have the conversation among the board in terms of step number 1, whether to retain it or remove it. So with that, I'll yield to Jay and then Lou.
So just maybe a parameter or a guide. I sure don't want to open up a general discussion about all school names, because I could pick 2 or 3 right off the top that don't make a lot of sense and not very inspirational to me. But I like the way Vince has framed it in my listening. It's these are figures or characters that have good weight or goodness in them, but the racist part is outweighing it. So I would recommend that one parameter of the conversation is a conversation that goes something like, do these people's racist backgrounds outweigh in substantial manners or in some manner or some weight their contribution, and therefore we shouldn't name the school. And then you move to a second parameter, which is, and who should we have? And if we find one or two or three that say yes, they should all be gone, then we find another parameter of, well, what would we place along the guidelines of inspirational or whatever the criteria we use. So I think the first thing is about weighing the contribution, inspiration versus the racism, and that could be the work of a group.
Thank you, Jay. Next up is Lou.
I think it can turn into a conversation, some unintended harm by saying, does their racism outweigh their good things that they did? Because that also sends a very strong message to community members that experience racism on a daily, not just in Corvallis, but also in the schools. And so like, does the racist views outweigh the good that they brought? I mean, that might land a certain type of way with folk. Just wanted to point that out. But I just had a question actually more about clarity. Are we suggesting that we may not look at this next week and then our next board meeting is in September? Is that?
Yeah, I would propose, if there's no objections from the board, is that we come back next week with the agenda item there. It's going to be a second reading, however, without an intention to vote on the resolution as a whole. And with an intention of reviewing two elements, further the discussion on whether Jay's proposal regarding step number 1 moves forward or not. And we can discuss that and have consensus or agreements or possibly a motion on that. And also a second item would be if Ryan would have the charter ready so we can have it ready for review. But I don't want to put you on the spot if a charter draft could be available for next week.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I think that would be very good, and it is consistent with the community wanting to know things as soon as possible and being able to review them. And if they want to provide public comments, they see the agenda item. Just to emphasize, there is not going to be a vote on the whole resolution, but if we end up with a discussion on point 1, we could end up with a motion if Jay desires. And Jay and you and I, and probably with the author and sponsors, could work on a language that phrase the point of proposal that you want, and then we can present it to the board. So we can have really clarity with the community about what we're talking about.
Okay, that's what I was asking, because when we've usually seen things as a second read, we've voted on them. So this isn't what I'm used to us doing. That's why I was asking, like, so the second read is actually not when we would vote later on. Is that what you're?
Correct.
Like
so
whether or not we're going to adopt the resolution in general. Okay, because I mean, I just have a little bit of like, we always take extra time to do the right thing for some reason. And like sometimes doing the right thing is doing the right thing. And we all know that, but there's always resistance to that as well. And I just felt a need to point that out, that things that do lean towards maybe discomfort with change and that advocate for marginalized community members in one-sided histories tend to need extra time for the comfort to be there. And I wanted to just call it what it was.
absolutely. And I want to really acknowledge that. Thank you, Lou, for highlighting it. I usually don't invoke a public comment that comes up, and usually I read the emails and not give them highlights and if I disagree with them. But in spirit of what you just mentioned, Lou, and it's really touched me really badly, honestly. I'm still feeling shook up because of it. You know, when people say, wait your turn, and then when your turn comes up, we'll give you an opportunity for whatever it is. And there was a public comment, and with all respect to the commenter who mentioned that, but the comment was regarding schools that acknowledges the native or indigenous communities. Let's wait until the Corvallis community grows and we need an additional school, and then we'll name the school number, the additional school for indigenous people. And that was actually shook me a lot, because it just gives me a realization for those first people who were there, if there was one school in Corvallis, it should be in appreciation and respect to them, not saying wait your turn for the original people. And I think that's in the spirit of what you mentioned. Expediency is important. Deliberation, community engagement is important. We need to strike the right balance. Sorry, I'm editorializing a lot on this. So on that point, I want to ask the board, I mentioned two elements here. I want to get a thumbs up from you about number one, we will revisit this next week and we're not gonna vote on the entirety of the resolution. Are we okay with both? And feel free to say thumbs up or maybe somewhere in between, so you want to discuss it. All right, so I'll give the floor for those somewhere in between or thumbs down to speak to it. So we have Sarah, Vince, and Lou. I'll go with Sarah first.
Wait, Sammy, I can't show you my thumb because I'm not connected with my camera, but I am a thumbs down.
So how about we start with you, since
you don't have to start with me. I just realized you can't see my thumb, so.
Sorry. All right, Therese, go ahead. If Sarah is okay with that. So we're talking about approach. How do you feel about the approach?
Okay, so my statement about being thoughtful about the timeline was not about, I guess what I wanted to be clear about was the timeline around choosing new names, not needing to delay declaring that we are going to remove these names. I don't think we need to have any delay in declaring that we're going to change the names. I also don't think that at this point, that is something that we need to have more community involvement in, because it's in alignment with our expressed statement of equity. I am uncomfortable with the notion that we would weigh anybody's racist comments when we have Black staff people whose hair has been grabbed in our schools at work. There's no conversation for me on that. That's not a safe space for them, for those staff members. And I don't need to have any more discussion about whether or not it's appropriate for us to change the names. We need to have discussion about how best to do that in terms of incorporating the community. But I don't think this is one of those situations where we need to kick it out to the community to decide if there's enough agreement that the name should go. I think our mission, our strategic goals, they say that the names should go. And I'm perfectly fine with voting for the names to go. I don't think that I could support splitting the resolution up and removing that piece out. I think that's where its power is, in stating we're coming into the school year and through some timeline and through some process that we don't yet know, but that we're going to figure out. And maybe we should figure that out and bring that to the conversation when we vote for this, because I think that would be helpful. That it is a matter of when, it's not a matter of if. And what we want is community insight about how best to do this in a way that is honoring to our community. But keeping the names isn't honoring to our community. And so in my mind, that's just not a viable pathway forward.
All right, thank you, Therese. Sarah?
Yeah, I want to voice my discomfort with waiting for comfort. As a member of the community that often gets to decide when we're comfortable and things should move forward, this is one of those things that we can make up a lot of excuses to delay. My first concern was whether we had it in our capacity as a district to deal with this right now. And I talked to Ryan about that this morning. And once I was comfortable that our district is capable of educating our children and changing school names at the same time, then I felt like, okay, well, we don't need to delay anymore. There is going to be discomfort around this, but that's okay. We've asked other people to be uncomfortable for a long time. So I think we don't want to sit on this and wait for the whole community to decide that we're comfortable now.
Thank you, Sarah. Vince?
I'll just echo comments from both Sarah and Therese. For me, I feel strongly. I wrote a good portion of the resolution. I support it. I would like to see it move forward. I think people of color in our community would like to see us move forward with it.
Okay. So with that, Jay, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's viewpoint. But what I think you are saying tonight is that in the span of 10 days, because we got this like Monday, and we would vote on it next Thursday, so roughly 10 days, 11 days, you have the wisdom regarding what is an appropriate inspirational or not inspirational name. And I think we could go and talk and debate. There are other models of districts that I've shown you that says this is the kind of stuff that tears people apart and deserves community input. And you're saying, no, we don't. We know you have the power. The board has the votes. You could change those right now. You could say done. But I don't think that engenders trust. It doesn't engender transparency. It doesn't engender respect. It says 5 of us or 6 of us know better. And so we don't need your input. We don't need a discussion. And we're not even going to follow processes that Portland Public and Eugene have set forth as what they would require of them. Instead, we'll just make the decision. I think that's very insulting. I think it's very damaging to the community that we represent and their support for things that we do going forward. I don't fear at all making change. I told you I could have lots of discussions about other people that should be named instead of Hoover and instead of Wilson. But to do it on our own, to say, let's boot them out for whatever, I think that really takes some people down. It insults those communities. And I'm not saying it's good to be racist. Absolutely not. I think we've all agreed that every person that we know in history has warts and context. So I think those things ought to be discussed in an open way, not in a 10-minute sprint to get this done. So I think it's a real slam to the public.
All right, I'll recognize Vince and then Lou and then Therese. Vince?
I just want to clarify that item 1 in this resolution only removes the names.
Yeah.
That's all it does. And that we entrust the renaming of schools solely to the district and the community. And it was written with that intention. And I spoke to the reasons. For me personally, I kind of view it in moral terms, but people will view it differently. But that is why I want to move with some exigence, because I think those 3 figures are significantly offensive to people that hold racial justice dear to themselves and for others. And what those figures represent, at least in their behavior, is not aligned with the values of the district. And I feel that we have a responsibility to move swiftly to remove those names. And if we don't, then we're abdicating on that responsibility. We are elected to represent this community. And if we believe in those documents that we write for ourselves, then we should be willing to act on them. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. And I'm okay with living with the discomfort. So yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Thank you. Next up is Lou and then Therese.
I just wanted real quick, I don't know if Tina had an opportunity because we can't see thumbs up or thumbs down for them, but I wanted to point that out, but also just express a little bit of sadness that it wasn't clear that we I don't know why there was not clarity around we're asking the community to rename the schools, because that's pretty clear in the resolution. And so I just wanted to make sure that community members, and Jay, since you were confused on that as well, see that in item B, 2B talks about that and what that process can look like. Item 1 is just asking for those names to be removed in interim, it says it right there, interim designations are assigned to those schools. And so if community can, if that was confusing, if you can look at item 1 and then 2B, that helps clarify. And I talked about that when I was speaking, so I hope that community heard that too, that that's one of the things I am the most excited about, is for community involvement, not just parents, but students, because they're the ones in these schools, and that would be a great project for them to learn about things. And so, and it's parents, students, guardian, building staff members of the community. And so it's a group effort. It's not all on one person, and it's a wide variety of representation. And so I just wanted to point out where those were in the resolution for people who may be watching. But again, Sammy, I don't know if Tina had any, I'm not trying to call you out, Tina, but I know we can't see your thumbs up, down.
Yeah, I apologize, Tina. Would you like to speak?
Sure. My sentiments are with the same as Vince and Sarah and Therese. There's no question there should not be a delay on agreeing. I agree that we should change the name, and yet we still need some protocol around community input on the name change itself and get some ideas. The uncomfortable work is taking the action and following through with the action. And the action from, in my viewpoint, is we should not have a delay on saying that we're going to change the name.
Thank you, Tina.
Sammy, I didn't even say my part because I was trying to clarify that point, but it was just standing by that statement that sometimes we just want to wait too long to do the right thing. And just to reiterate the uncomfortability, it's not comfortable for everyone. I mean, even though I'm for this, it's not comfortable for me, like as somebody that's targeted by some of the discrimination in town personally, like it brings a sense of like, well, I get targeted more for speaking up for this. And so I wanted to be real about that. The risks taken as a local Indigenous woman of color, the risk that I take in advocating for something like this, I don't think people realize that. And so I wanted to be honest with the board, with the staff, and the community watching this, that is something I experienced here in our own community.
Thank you, Lou, for your courage and service and sacrifice. Thank you. Therese?
I don't think we should presume that we haven't heard from the community that these names are problematic. I, on the contrary, have plenty of feedback that I have received that the names are problematic. So I appreciate, obviously, that we want the community to be involved. I think the renaming process has been called out as a place where we need the community to take the lead on that. But from an equity perspective, we wouldn't go to the community and wait for them to confirm for us that we should address problems of racial, of a racial nature, of a racially violent nature. And while I don't think that, I wouldn't go so far as to say the name itself is violence, I would say that the name connotes, though, a history of violence for some individuals. And we don't need a community consensus that that is happening. We've had community members who have commented and shared that. So it's true that they haven't necessarily commented and shared it in response to a statement that the board intends to bring this up and potentially take action. That is a short timeline, but to suggest that this hasn't been an ongoing community dialogue, I think that misrepresents the voices. If we turn this over to the community to decide this, we will see individuals come forward to, if we turn over to decide whether or not we should rename the schools, I believe that it will be a repeat of when we went to the community to find out if the PTAs should operate differently, not how they should operate differently in terms of equity. And I am not convinced that the voices of the individuals that are most affected by this will find their way to the top to be able to actually take the lead in that dialogue, because that's not how privilege works. Privilege tends to be held by the people who have it pretty tightly. And I don't see the community just saying, let's just get rid of our privilege and let the individuals for whom these comments and these histories of these individuals is most impactful to their own personal narrative and the historical narrative of their families. Let's let them have that conversation. I don't see people just stepping aside and doing that. And so, and because I'm quite convinced that community members have already made it clear, I think we are honoring at least some of our community members' needs and expressed wishes about what we would do in terms of bringing leadership to this area. And since we're not going to be able to make everyone happy in a situation where some people want the names and some people don't want the names, I think we're going to have to take a position as a board about what's going to happen next. So again, I think that I don't see a reason why we need to continue to belabor the question of whether or not the name should be changed. I feel very comfortable that there is both a rationale and plenty of community members who have made it known that they would like to see symbols that have and signposts of institutional racism deconstructed, removed, and replaced with something that is more reflective of who actually lives in our community and is more, I don't want to just use I'm just going to stop talking because I don't have another point. I've already made my point. That's it.
Thank you, Therese. I appreciate your comments. Jay, would you like to speak? And then I'll try to summarize a possible alternative direction to the one that was proposed.
Yes. What I have heard, first of all, I wasn't confused, Lou. I absolutely understand the nature of the resolution. It's a two-part one. It says, step one, we will dename, take off, whatever the right word is, change the name of 3 schools, and we will embark on a policy on how to, a plan on how to rename them. I absolutely understand what we're doing. We haven't talked a lot about the criteria that the resolution puts in, but in effect, it kind of says, here's some criteria, kind of like maybe the Portland policy or whatever. So we haven't even talked about whether those are the right criteria. But I think what bothers me is that a group of 7 of us, right now it counts to be 5 or 6 of you, who think that you know the right answer on something that the community has now had about, 4 days of input, and that you don't owe them the standard that we've used again and again and again about listening and being open and you talk about courage. It's about courage to listen to people who would say, no, don't change Jefferson, don't change Hoover. And then having the courage to say, I've heard you, and I'm still going to say, those are too much of a racist background people, I'm going to change. That would be courage. But it's not courage to I think, wait and let them have input and be open about it. No one has explained to me emergency. And so I strongly oppose it. And it's a team game, so I will listen to what you all have to say, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. I do have a proposal from what I heard from the majority and from everybody, is that we could come next week for a second reading with a vote on the resolution. However, with 2 caveats there. Number 1, entertaining alternative amendments that Jay recommended and or might recommend. And number 1, I think he might recommend, or what I heard from Jay, you might want to recommend that we don't do step number 1. And also another recommendation you thought of is regarding the stipulation on the criteria in step number 2, the parameters in step number 2B, you mentioned that there might be some other elements you want to propose or leaving it open to the process. So you and I, and probably with the authors as well, could have a discussion on what that amendment might look like. And we would have a motion on the resolution as is, propose an amendment if you wish so, have a debate on that, and then have a debate on the full resolution. Another thing that will happen is we will have from Superintendent Noss the charter, which is usually FYI, not for action, correct? And it's for feedback. So we will give feedback to Ryan on that charter, and the charter is actually consistent with part 2B, which stipulates the superintendent has latitude to determine the scope of the process. So rather than tell the community we're voting on this resolution, here's the latitude of the scope of the process, they will be also able to see the intention of the superintendent, and we will be able to give feedback about the charter. So that's, I think, the summary of a potential pathway, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Let's do a raise of virtual hands so we can have a discussion on that. What I would like to ask you if you feel comfortable with that approach, and let me know if you want me to summarize it again. Who's next?
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm confused. Like,
Yes.
what are you, I know it's because it's late and also because we've discussed a lot, but can you, like, I'm not asking you to restate it. I'm just confused as exactly what you're asking. Are you asking if we want to, which direction of the stuff you just said we wanted to do next?
Yeah, so.
Okay.
Brian, you want to go ahead? Yes, not at all.
I'll let Ryan.
What Sammy just proposed is actually standard practice for this board to bring something back at a second reading to take as an action item. And if you decide not to take action on it, you don't have to, you can make that decision. Jay can come forward with an alternative proposal and sub-proposals based on those, that set criteria. So I don't think you have to do any sort of straw polling right now, unless you're not going to bring it back as a second reading for action on next Thursday night. I think it just progresses like everything else has. That's, I mean, that's what you just described is standard practice. So I think I would say if there's something unique to the practice, that that should be the consideration rather than what we tend to do.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that's just like,
Thanks.
I was just trying to get that clear for myself. Thank you. Sorry.
I have a short question.
Yes.
I just want to clarify the nature of our August 6th meeting. That is a full meeting. Will we be hearing public comment in that meeting?
Correct. We will be hearing public comments on any topic, including this topic from the community. And for anyone who's listening to us right now, they will be able to provide public comments through emailing the board secretary before noon on that day, and they will be able to provide a telephonic comments. In addition, they can write to the board as well. And that's the public comments will be open next week because it's a business meeting.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thanks, Vince. Therese?
Sammy, when is the next meeting scheduled after the 6th?
Give me a second to. Yes.
September 10th.
We have a board retreat scheduled for the 13th of August, and the next business meeting is September 10th.
You got the answer, Therese?
I did, yes. Thank you.
Awesome. And I would say the retreat schedule is very full. So we can't, I would discourage doing any business during the retreat beyond what we're doing. Yeah, it's not action oriented meeting. All right, Teresa, who else? Anyone wants to speak or have any comments before we move on? And to summarize, we're going to do a standard practice, which is come back with a second reading. We could decide not to take an action or take an action. The community is encouraged to provide feedback and comments as soon as we have any language or a proposal from any board members as an alternative. They can introduce it, and we'll have it in advance in writing so we can review it, and I will encourage that. And as well, we will have an outline of the charter that will speak about the process. So I think we've done really good discussion today. I really appreciate everyone for the discussion and productive work. Any other further discussion on this item? Lou?
I will keep it brief, I promise. I just encourage folk to read the resolution and especially the parts that were pointed out earlier about the process stuff that's included in it so far, and also the educational component we didn't get to talk about, but during my initial comments, that is something that is one of the most important parts of it as well to me, that progressive educational curriculum component for students. And thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Any further comments? Seeing no further comments, next item on the agenda is the FSF Memorial Scholarship Program from OSBA. This is for information only. It's the scholarship that we had last year. We applied again and we won the scholarship. The application for the scholarship is included. We have 3 sessions plus board evaluation. If we subscribe and complete those sessions for school board professional development, we will get a scholarship, which is monies that we can award to students. So it's really an amazing thing, and we've been doing it, and we're very proud of the board commitment to do this work. So thank you all. And if there are any comments or questions or feedback, and I'll start with Ryan.
So we would continue to work with Kristen Miles this year. And the first meeting with her would be a part of our board retreat, taking the board goals and the board evaluation from last spring. The 2 areas that were identified were community engagement, and the second area was racial equity. And so we would start with our board retreat focus on those 2 areas. And that would be and so I'll be reaching out to Kristen and working with her on that retreat date and some of that time spent working with her. So that would be the first component. One of the things that's been nice about it has been there's some ability to tailor to our district because we've gone through that program before. And so that initial board governance training, we've all seen the video of the coach and the students wanting, all the scenarios. We've seen all the scenarios, which were between management and board governance. So board level, management level. And so we wouldn't have to go through that piece again. We would really just be able to tailor it to the focuses we need to continue to move forward. So we're excited about that.
Vince.
So I just wanted to raise, it was a conversation that Lou and I have had about, and and you as well, Sammy, about the local social justice tour. And I'm just curious what the possibility is of bringing that into our professional development this year. I certainly don't want to discuss that in detail tonight, but I just want to put it on the board's on radar. And I think Lou can speak more eloquently to, the tour and what's included, because she's actually been on the tour and I haven't.
Right. So it's actually part of Dr. Noche Barnes' Ethnohistory Methodologies courses at OSU. And basically, it has different stories of that you don't really hear about our local community here in Corvallis. I was part of the first class and I learned so much doing research for that. And there's 3 different booklets at this point. Actually, there's 4 now because they just had another class. But if board are interested, I thought it'd be interesting when I talked to Sammy and Vince about it as sort of a development, especially as we're talking about learning histories. It focuses on untold histories specifically. So there's lots of early Black community members, Indigenous community members. There's more recent stories of queer community members, Asian American community members that you don't really learn anywhere else. And they're really amazing. They're written from a historical fiction type lens, because it's not like a biography of the people, but it's telling their stories in another way. And there's a map too, so you would basically go to the places that you read about and see that exact connection to that story in town. So it's really cool. I have copies of them and happy to do a rotation if y'all are interested. And Ryan, Melissa too, y'all too. But yeah, so I guess email me if you're interested.
Wonderful, thank you. And probably I'll connect you with Ryan so we can do maybe incorporate it in the structural part of the professional development. I'm assuming probably after we all do it, do the tours, we could have a debrief. I think that could be very valuable as well. So thank you for giving that proposal. I'm really excited about it. It will get us to walk around and really understand and appreciate the history that we're not aware of. So
I've been hearing about these tours and have never gotten to participate. And I would love to have a better rounded understanding of the history of our community. I think that would be fabulous. So thank you for bringing that up.
For sure. And they're, I really like doing them as a group better, like how they're intended and having them, the stories read to you on site. But because of the pandemic, I kind of talked to Dr. Barnes a little bit about some alternatives to work on that. But if other people are interested in that, he's definitely the connection.
awesome. Thank you, Lou. Any further comments on this scholarship program?
I'd just like to say on behalf of the OSBA board development team, thank you for making that investment and doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really appreciative of OSBA leadership on this topic, and our partnership with them has been very helpful for our school district and school board. All right, seeing no further comments, unless there's someone on the phone wants to speak, we're good. So seeing no further comments, next item on the agenda is consolidated action. As a reminder, the items under this portion of the agenda are for action. Does anyone have a question about anything in the consolidated action? Would you like to pull out anything for a question? Vince?
I would just like to make a comment. Item C under consolidated action is extension of the superintendent's contract. I think it is, you know, you all know that I now work for OSBA, and I have much more contact with superintendents around the state. And I'm just going to tell you that we have one of the best superintendents in Oregon, and probably in the region as well. And we are very, very lucky. And so it is with great enthusiasm that I will be voting in a affirmative for approving consolidated action tonight, because we have an amazing superintendent who is a great leader. And that was very evident at the beginning of this meeting. I was just very impressed with the performance of our staff tonight and what you folks have pulled together. And indeed, Jay, you're right. They're building a plane as they're flying it. And it's just, I'm just glad that our children are in your hands. So I would love to make a motion as well.
Let's see if, unless there's someone else who wants to pull out anything. All right, 1, 2, 3. See none. Vince, what's your motion?
I move to approve consolidated action.
Do I hear a second?
A second.
That was by Therese, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So moved by Vince and second by Therese to approve the consolidated action. Any further debates on the motion? Seeing none, let's take a roll call. Jay?
Aye.
Therese?
Aye.
Vince?
Aye.
Lou?
Hi.
Tina?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Did I miss anyone else? And I vote aye, passes unanimously. And thank you, thank you. We extended the part of the consolidated action is extending the 3-year contract for 1 more year. Ryan, we're enthusiastic and excited to continue working with you. We really trust you and feel very honored to work with you. It's a partnership that's been productive, and your ability to lead is phenomenal.
Yeah, partnerships is a lot, because it is a partnership. I appreciate having good partners and all of this.
It's our pleasure. All right. Any other items on the agenda? I think we have board member comments. So go on the raise hand so we can know who's on the docket. All right, we have first Jay, and then Vince, and then Therese. Jay?
So I have two comments. First, Ryan, I would love to have said I'm enthusiastic because I am. And so thank you for your hard work. And I have told all the people I run into, the secret to a strong board is having a really good superintendent, because you make our life work really well. And so thank you. I'm absolutely supportive of what you're doing. My second comment is to say to the board, without, I hope, predicting to a bunch of people that might be listening, I'm sorry, but I think this is going to tear us up a little bit in terms of the issue of Thomas Jefferson. I don't think the other two will. So I apologize for not making it unanimous, and because I think it's going to be a real darned problem for us, and we'll just move forward. So I will be back with Vince perhaps and say, here's my wording of my amendment. And you know, you get to vote the way you guys want to, but I'm really sorry that our community is gonna be excited now. So that's the way it is.
Thank you, Jay. And I will just comment on that if you allow me. I really appreciate us having a great relationship as a board where we're comfortable to disagree. And also we agree to be uncomfortable, and we venture into the good trouble, necessary trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for embracing that. Next up is Vince.
First is appreciation. It's good to see you, Melissa Harder, in the flesh. The other is appreciation for the construction tours. And I'm sure Dale Kuykendall has already gone to bed if he knows what's good for him. But I just really want to express appreciation for the amazing work on the bond. And Sammy and Sarah and I got to go out and see the work that was happening and, you know, interact with the contractors on the site. I didn't get to go to Sheldon, but we got to go to Lincoln and Garfield. And it's just impressive, and the impressive professionalism of our contractors. And once again, I feel very grateful for our bond leadership team and for Wenaha. And it's just, that is a real bright point in all this pandemic, the struggle with the pandemic. And we're going to have some great schools. Yeah, Lincoln's going to be an awesome school. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Vince. Next up is Therese, and then Sarah.
Yes, I wanted to echo the sentiment that as a board, I do think we are able to work well together and able to have differences of perspective, view, even land in different positions regarding outcomes and still continue to work well together. I am hopeful that our ability to model that will deflect some of the concerns about our community not being able to, well, being severely disrupted in a negative way. I'm hoping for disruption because disruption is a great change agent. I'm not hoping for it to be destructive process, but disruptive process, absolutely. I hope that we can, our board and our superintendent and district leadership, that we are able to, and I am confident that we will be able to navigate this process in a way that will allow for differences and still allow us to do our work and for our community to still thrive. So yeah, I guess I am anticipating disruption. I'm hopeful for good things to come from it though.
Thank you, Therese. Next up is Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. So Vince, in all your contact at OSBA, where you're talking to superintendents and districts and stuff, please don't tell them how wonderful our superintendent is. The last thing we need is headhunters coming and stealing him away. So
I'm sorry, the rumor is out.
Also,
the
this
group
is public meeting.
No, we need to acknowledge the strength of our superintendent and his whole team and everyone who's worked on this plan to, not only build a plane while you're flying it, but build a plane that's carrying our children, which is, beyond stressful and concerning, because we have kids who are going to have a hard time, and we just are doing our best to take care of them. I wanted to share that I had another conversation with Oregon State today. I had reached out to them about some concerns I'd had about reopening and metrics that we had been giving as school districts, but wondering what their metrics were for opening the university. And Steve Clark, who I talked to, was not aware of any set metrics for OSU opening. I think he is going to be relying, or not he, OSU is going to be relying very heavily on the community to mitigate some of the potential problems with the incoming students, which just unfortunately, fortunately, because it's what we should all be doing, but unfortunately, because we can't mess this up, it means that we need to be all the more conscious of the choices we make and the risks we take. And we need to be very careful and conservative about our social distancing. Thank goodness we now have a mask requirement in place. That certainly makes things feel a little bit better. But it's really going to be on us. And really what this determines is whether we can open schools again. And I kind of hate, especially as somebody who works with college students. And so I think about kids kindergarten all the way through. I hate to be worried that one group of the students that I care about is going to be determining whether all the rest of my students can go to school. But I think that's what we're all worried about. So please, as a community, for anybody who is still at 10:30 watching this meeting, recognize it's really going to be on us and our behavior to determine when and how our kids get to go to school.
Lou? Thank you, Sarah. Lou?
I just wanted to circle way back to the beginning of the meeting and again thank Ryan and the team for such a great plan you have in place for not just the kids but the staff too. It's so comprehensive, so I just wanted to restate that appreciation. And like Ben said, it's really great to see you too, Melissa. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I said enough about the other stuff.
Any further comments? All right, the record, I remember 10:35, so I'm not gonna have a filibuster until 10:35. Seeing no further comments, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
We were so close, Sammy.
I want to keep my record.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Everybody.